There's a quiet kind of suffering no one talks about. The pain of always feeling like something's missing, like you're not doing enough, like you are not enough. No matter how many goals you reach, how many people love you, or how good your life might look, there's still that heavy voice inside that whispers, "You're not quite there yet." It shows up in the silence after an argument, in the mirror when no one's looking, in the middle of the night when the world is asleep, but your mind won't shut off. You start asking questions you're too scared to say out loud. Why am I not happy? Why do I feel so behind? When will I finally be enough? If that feeling has ever found you, this is the video you've been needing. Because Buddhism doesn't tell you to fix yourself. It doesn't ask you to hustle for your worth. It whispers something most people never hear in their entire lives. You were already whole before the world convinced you otherwise. This isn't a motivational speech. It's not about reaching some perfect version of yourself. This is about undoing the lie that you were broken in the first place. So if you're tired of pretending, tired of performing, tired of chasing approval like a dog chasing its tail, stay with me. What you're about to hear might just be the beginning of a quiet revolution inside you, one that doesn't need applause, doesn't need permission, and doesn't need to be anything other than what it already is. Let's begin. And now that you're here, really here, let's begin with the first wound that hides behind most of our exhaustion, our need to be seen, to be praised, to be told we're good enough. It's one of the heaviest chains a person can carry, and the strange part is most don't even know they're wearing it. They wake up with it, eat with it, fall asleep with it. It slips into every thought, every decision, every interaction. But Buddhism teaches something radically different, something quieter, something that doesn't shout over the noise, but dissolves it. Let's talk about the silence that doesn't need praise. There's a kind of silence that isn't empty. It doesn't ache with loneliness or buzz with awkwardness. It isn't waiting to be filled. It isn't a punishment. This silence is full. It holds peace. It holds truth. And in Buddhism, it is in this kind of silence that self-worth is found, not the loud, clapping kind of worth that comes from approval, but the kind that simply is, without conditions. Most people live like performers in a play that never ends, always trying to earn applause from someone, parents, friends, strangers, even themselves. They shape their lives into something applause-worthy. They collect compliments like a starving person collecting breadcrumbs. But the hunger never ends. That's the tragedy. No matter how loud the applause gets, it fades. It always fades. Then comes the fear. Will they still love me if I don't keep performing? Will I still matter if I'm not impressive today? But a monk sitting under a tree with nothing but his breath and the wind knows something different. He knows the applause was never the source of peace. That validation is a sugar high. That true nourishment doesn't come from outside. It rises from silence, and not just any silence, silence without need. In Buddhist practice, this is trained gently but firmly. Through meditation, through mindfulness, through rituals stripped of performance. When you sit with your breath, no one is clapping, no one is watching. There's no gold medal at the end, just you and the moment. And that is the point. Buddhism slowly weans the heart off its addiction to praise, not by punishing it, but by showing it something better. Think about it. The Buddha attained enlightenment alone, under a tree, with no one to witness the moment. No camera, no audience, no celebration, just stillness. And yet, that stillness changed the course of history. The wisdom that arose from it has touched millions. But it wasn't born from fanfare. It was born from surrender, from letting go of the need to be seen as wise and simply being present enough to see clearly. This is hard for the modern mind to understand. We live in a time where everything is measured. Likes, views, praise, applause, grades, promotions. It becomes easy to believe that if others don't praise us, then we must not be doing enough. We must not be enough. But that belief is exactly what breaks us. Buddhism answers that illusion, not with more noise, but with a quiet truth, that nothing needs to be added to the self. It's not unfinished. It's not missing parts. It just needs to be remembered beneath the distractions. There's a Buddhist saying, when the mind is silent, the whole universe surrenders. That doesn't mean the stars bow down to you. It means that in the stillness, you no longer feel separate from anything. You don't need the world to praise you because you are the world. What's left to prove? Who are you trying to impress if everything that exists is already part of you? In deep meditation, the ego doesn't get stronger. It gets quieter. It dissolves, little by little. The part of the mind that needs to be the best, the right one, the admired one, it loosens. And what takes its place isn't weakness, it's clarity. A clarity that feels like a mountain, steady, unmoving, silent, but powerful. This isn't the silence of giving up. It's not hiding. It's not apathy. It's peace that no longer needs to be earned. And it scares people because it can't be controlled. You can't manipulate someone who doesn't need your approval. You can't sell self-worth to someone who's already found it inside. That's why the world pushes so hard, because true peace is dangerous to those who profit from insecurity. Monks are often seen as calm, almost untouchable. But that calm didn't come from a perfect life. It came from learning how to stop chasing the applause that was never real to begin with. It came from letting silence speak louder than achievement, from allowing stillness to matter more than recognition. Think about a child playing alone, totally absorbed in their game, not caring who's watching. That's the natural state of enoughness. It gets buried, but it never dies. Buddhist practice is not about becoming something new. It's about returning, unlearning, peeling off the layers of false value until what's left is simple, quiet, undeniable. Self-worth that's built on praise will always crack. It's made of glass. It shatters the moment someone disapproves or ignores or forgets. But self-worth that grows in silence, unseen, unpraised, is made of something stronger. It bends, it weathers storms, but it never breaks. In many monasteries, novice monks sweep the floor every morning, not for praise, not for status, but as a lesson. The dust always returns. The praise always fades. The ego always creeps back in. So, sweep again, not to impress, just to stay clean, just to stay present. That's what makes the silence so powerful. It has nothing to prove. It just is. There's a quiet moment during walking meditation when everything stops mattering. The right pace, the perfect form, the expected result, all gone. Just steps, just the sound of feet touching ground. That's it. And in that, the mind finally learns nothing needs to be added, nothing needs to be fixed. Peace isn't something earned by effort. It's found in the absence of needing effort. When monks chant, they often chant in Pali, a language no one understands anymore. And yet, they chant anyway. Because it's not about the audience, it's not about being understood or applauded. It's about rhythm, breath, presence. That is the lesson. What's sacred doesn't need to be seen to be real. You don't need to be understood to be worthy. So many people walk around with a silent hunger, not for food, but for recognition. They do good things, hoping someone will notice. They wear themselves out, trying to be seen, trying to be praised, trying to be enough in the eyes of others. But that road never ends. It turns people into ghosts, alive but never fully present, always haunted by what someone else thinks. The silence Buddhism teaches is not the silence of being ignored. It's the silence of no longer needing to be praised, of no longer waiting for permission to feel worthy. That silence holds a power that applause never can, because it isn't loud. It's rooted. It doesn't sway. It doesn't ask. It doesn't beg. It simply knows. And that kind of knowing changes everything. It doesn't just shift how you feel about yourself, it shifts how you treat others. When you no longer need praise, you stop chasing status. You stop competing. You start listening. You become kind without needing to be thanked. You give without needing to be seen. That's the kind of peace that turns ordinary people into something unshakable. Buddhism doesn't try to fill you with noise. It invites you to sit with your own emptiness until you realize it's not empty at all. It's full of enoughness. But you can't hear that when you're always looking for applause. You can't feel it when you're always performing. That's why monks live simple lives. Not because they hate comfort, but because in simplicity there's no distraction from what's real, from what's always been real. That being here, as you are, without decoration, without performance, is enough, has always been enough. The world will keep trying to sell you worth. It will put it in products, in praise, in comparisons. And every time, Buddhism will whisper the same thing. Don't buy it. Don't chase it. Sit still. Breathe. Listen. And remember, because when you stop chasing applause, when you stop needing the world to tell you who you are, something strange and beautiful happens. You come home, not to a better version of yourself, but to the self that never needed to be better, just more still, more awake, more silent. That silence is where enoughness lives, not out there, not in someone else's approval, but here, in the breath, in the pause between thoughts, in the space where no praise is needed, because nothing is missing. And now that the noise has begun to fade, let's keep walking this path. One step deeper, one breath softer, because the next truth waiting for you may be the one that finally breaks the mirror. And once the silence settles, once the need for praise finally releases its grip, something else starts to tremble beneath the surface. The image. Not the real you, but the version you've spent years polishing. The one built from other people's eyes. The one that lives in the mirror, in selfies, in social media profiles, in how people describe you when you're not in the room. That reflection becomes a prison so easily. And the most dangerous part, you start believing it's you. So now, we go deeper. Not into stillness this time, but into clarity, the kind of clarity that only arrives when you stop believing in the mirror. There's a quiet grief in realizing that you've mistaken a reflection for a self, that every smile you adjusted, every pose you corrected, every opinion you adopted just to be more acceptable was all for a version of you that never truly existed. Not really. It was always just an image, a surface, a projection. Buddhism calls this mistaken identity a form of clinging, grasping onto form, to labels, to masks. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from attachment, and nowhere is this more painfully obvious than in our attachment to who we think we are. That tight grip on the roles we play, daughter, son, achiever, failure, attractive, unwanted, clever, broken. These identities feel like solid ground, but the moment you need them to feel whole, you've already lost the ground beneath your feet. The mirror lies, but it lies in a sweet voice. It flatters sometimes. It praises. It tells you you're good, but only if you look a certain way, only if you sound a certain way, only if you act the way others want you to. That kind of praise is poison dipped in sugar, and we drink it because we're thirsty for belonging. But that sugar wears off fast. Then comes the crash, the shame, the fear, the doubt. That's the trap. Buddhism doesn't fix the mirror. It doesn't help you build a better version of the image. It asks you to stop looking, to turn away. Because the real you, the awareness behind your eyes, has no shape, no color, no name. It cannot be captured by a reflection. The teachings say that identity is like a dream, real enough while it lasts, but it dissolves the moment you wake up. And yet, most people live asleep. They fight to defend a dream self, decorate it, improve it, protect it from cracks. But it still vanishes every night when they close their eyes. Still disappears with every passing year as age steals the hair, the skin, the charm, the wit. What remains? What remains is what was always there. Awareness. The watcher. The presence that saw the changes but was never changed. Buddhism calls this the unconditioned. The part of you that does not depend on form to exist. That's what you are. Not the reflection, but the space in which the reflection appears. Look at how much suffering comes from chasing appearances. People burn out trying to look successful. They develop eating disorders trying to look thin. They lie just to seem smart. Fake happiness just to seem stable. But what if there's nothing wrong with not being impressive? What if the only real damage comes from pretending to be more than human? This is why in Buddhist monasteries, mirrors are rare. Not because monks are against self-care, but because they understand the danger of mistaking the outer frame for the inner truth. A monk may wear the same robe every day for 20 years, and yet his peace deepens because it's not found in what changes, it's found in what doesn't. There is a meditation practice where one looks at their face in the mirror for long periods. At first, you see yourself. Then, slowly, things begin to shift. The face becomes unfamiliar, features warp. You start to feel like a stranger is staring back. That's not a trick of the eyes, it's a glimpse of truth. Because the person you see isn't fixed. It never was. It's a temporary arrangement of flesh and story. One breath away from disappearing. When you're no longer obsessed with the reflection, something surprising happens. You feel free. Free from having to prove yourself. Free from the pressure to maintain an image. You can laugh without checking if your teeth are perfect. You can cry without worrying if someone thinks you're weak. You can speak without rehearsing. You can rest. That's what makes letting go of the mirror so healing. It's not just about physical appearance, it's about every form of performance, every attempt to control how others see you. Because the moment you try to control that, you've given them power over your peace, and that power is too sacred to give away. A Buddhist master once said, "The true face is the one you had before your parents were born." That sounds strange until you feel it. It means the essence of you existed before the world handed you a name, a gender, a role, a story. You existed before the costume, before the mirrors, and you'll exist after them too. In the Zen tradition, there's a saying, "When you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." It shocks people, but it's not literal. It means that even the idea of the perfect being is a trap. If you think you need to become the Buddha by copying the image of one, you've missed the point. The goal isn't to look enlightened, it's to see through the illusion of needing to become anything at all. In modern life, mirrors are everywhere, not just on walls, but in screens, in comments, in comparisons. Every social media platform is a gallery of mirrors, and most people are stuck inside them, like a hall of warped reflections, trying to find one that finally makes them feel good enough. But Buddhism asks, why are you looking outward to find what's already inside? When you stop chasing the reflection, the energy that went into performance flows into presence. You become real again, not polished, not perfect, just real. And that realness carries a weightlessness you forgot was possible. You don't have to prove anything anymore. You just live. Speak when there's something to say. Be quiet when there's not. Smile when the heart moves. Rest when the body asks. No extra layers, no costume changes, no audience. And even when you make mistakes, which you will, you don't fall apart. Because your worth was never tied to your image. It was never built on flawless behavior or constant beauty. You were never the reflection. So the cracks no longer scare you. They remind you you're not the mirror. You never were. This is why monks laugh easily, why their presence feels light. Because they don't walk around defending a fragile identity. They don't need to. Their peace isn't held together by compliments. Their worth doesn't rise or fall with appearances. It flows from a deeper place. The place that doesn't move when life changes. The place that stays whole even when everything else falls apart. To reach that place doesn't require becoming someone else. It requires subtracting, unlearning, dropping the filters, turning away from the glass, and trusting that what you find underneath all that noise is already enough, already complete. So the next time you look in the mirror, pause. Don't rush to judge. Don't reach to fix. Just look. Then look behind the eyes, behind the smile, behind the features. See what's looking. That's you. Not the face, not the expression, not the reputation, not the name. Just the seeing itself. That's the part Buddhism speaks to. That's the part that doesn't age, doesn't perform, doesn't need makeup or awards or followers. It just is. And the more time you spend there, the less interest you'll have in impressing anyone ever again. Because why chase a reflection when you could rest in what's real? And as you begin to rest more deeply in that space, the next lesson will meet you exactly where you are. Not in what you wear or what you do, but in what you already are, even in silence, even in rags. And once the mirror cracks and you stop chasing the image, something else starts to lose its grip too. The need to look important, to dress your life in achievement, to decorate yourself in symbols, roles, and labels just to feel valid. But once the reflection loses its power, so do the costumes. Now we step into one of the deepest teachings of monastic life, a truth so simple it often gets overlooked. What you wear, what title you carry, what others call you, it never made you more worthy. So let's walk into the lesson of the robe that doesn't add worth. In Buddhist monasteries across the world, robes are the same color, same shape, same texture. Senior monks and beginners wear nearly the same thing. There's no glitter, no gold embroidery to say, this one is holier. The robe doesn't make the monk, the silence does, the humility does, the practice does. And even those are not about status, they're about returning. But in the outside world, things work differently. People wear power, they wear wealth, they wear respectability, and often they believe it. A job title becomes the new name. A designer label becomes proof of importance. A degree becomes identity. But this is just a more expensive costume, different from childhood dress-up games, only in price. Still just fabric. Monastic tradition teaches this through simplicity. When a monk receives a robe, it's not to elevate them, it's to strip down what no longer serves. In fact, some monasteries dye old funeral shrouds to make new robes, literally taking symbols of death and turning them into the clothing of awakening. It's not morbid, it's clarity, because what you wear to cover your body cannot cover your truth, and it certainly cannot add to it. You were not born with a name tag, or a bank account, or a resume. You were born as being, breathing, pure awareness. Then came the world, and the world brought its uniforms. It said, put this on and people will like you more. Put that on and you'll be respected. Wear this and you'll matter. So you did. And sometimes it worked, until it didn't, because the robe doesn't last. And when it fades, people panic. Who am I now that I've lost the job, the partner, the title, the youth? That fear comes from forgetting the robe was never you. You never needed it. The value was never in the cloth. It was in the person under it. The same is true for any role. Being called doctor doesn't make a heart wise. Wearing a priest's collar doesn't guarantee compassion. Even the Buddha rejected worship when people tried to deify him. He said, I am awake, not I am above you. The robe was only ever a reminder, not a crown. This is why some monks sweep leaves, why they cook, why they clean toilets, to remind themselves that their worth is not in status, not in how high they sit during ceremony, not in how many students they teach. It's in how empty they've become of ego, how little they cling to being special. And this, ironically, is where true dignity comes from not needing dignity at all, from being so grounded, so inwardly full that no recognition is needed, no robe, no rank, just presence. But this doesn't mean rejecting success or pretending titles don't exist. It means not confusing them with essence. You can wear the suit, sign the deal, carry the degree. Just don't think it makes you more real than someone who sweeps floors. Don't forget the robe is temporary. What it covers is eternal. So many people get lost in comparison because they think someone else's title means they're worth more. A best-selling author, a millionaire entrepreneur, a spiritual guru. But underneath the robe of reputation, every being still bleeds, still breathes, still breaks, and still heals. In Buddhist texts, even celestial beings, devas, gods, are said to envy human life. Why? Because only in human form can awakening happen, not as a king, not as a god, as a human, with skin that ages, with roles that fade. That is the perfect condition for waking up, because nothing can hide the truth here, not for long. In the Theravada tradition, there is a practice called tudong, where monks leave the monastery and wander with nothing but their robes and a bowl. They rely on generosity to survive, not because they can't work, but because the practice forces them to drop pride, to stop thinking, "I am someone." They walk, they eat what's given, they sleep under trees, and in that stripping down, something powerful happens. The person who thought they were a title disappears. What remains is presence. This lesson is not only for monks, it's for anyone who's ever felt invisible without their job, unlovable without their looks, forgotten without their label. Buddhism teaches that freedom begins where roles end, not because you must abandon your life, but because you stop mistaking it for who you are. There's a saying in Zen, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." Nothing changes, and yet everything does, because now you're not chopping wood as someone trying to prove worth. You're just chopping wood, just living, not for a title, not for praise, not to be called holy or smart or successful, just because it's what's needed. When you live like that, life becomes lighter. You don't panic when someone forgets your name. You don't need applause to sleep well. You can do something kind without posting about it. You can fail without collapsing, because you've stopped building your identity on something that can be taken away. Even your spiritual path can become a robe, a disguise. If you think being a spiritual person makes you better, more enlightened, more pure, you've just swapped one costume for another. Buddhism warns against this too. It says, the highest state is the simplest, when nothing needs to be added, not even spiritual ego. That's why some masters wear the same robes for years, even when they fray and tear. Not to appear humble, but because the robe does its job. It covers the body, that's all. It doesn't elevate the soul. It doesn't grant wisdom. It's just cloth. And once you see that, you can walk into any room, play any role, and never lose yourself. You can be the CEO and still bow to the janitor. You can be the teacher and still learn from the child. You can lose your job, your status, your outer form, and still feel whole. Because nothing ever added to your worth, and nothing ever could. So the next time you feel small because someone else wears a fancier robe, pause. Ask yourself, what am I confusing here? Am I seeing their being or just their costume? And what part of me still believes I need a costume too? Because the freedom you're seeking is not found in upgrading the robe. It's found in letting go of the need for one at all. And that kind of freedom, that kind of invisible robe, it never fades, never stains, never needs to be replaced. Now let's keep going. There's a deeper layer of this path waiting just beneath the surface. And it's growing, quietly, without applause, without needing to be seen, just like bamboo. And once the robe loses its weight, once the title is no longer mistaken for truth, what remains is something quieter, something more rooted, a kind of growth that isn't loud, isn't flashy, and doesn't ask to be noticed. It doesn't walk into a room trying to impress. It doesn't need followers, applause, or a platform. It just grows, deeply, silently, unshaken. This is where the next lesson lives, in the slow rise of something most people ignore, the bamboo that grows without applause. The story of bamboo is not just botanical, it's spiritual. For years after it's planted, bamboo shows almost nothing above ground. It looks like nothing's happening. People pass it by, wondering if it's even alive. But underground, it's preparing, spreading roots, building strength, weaving itself into the soil. Then, one day, when no one expects it, it shoots upward with astonishing speed, some species growing feet in a single day. But that rise was only possible because of what happened in silence, in darkness, beneath the surface. That is the perfect image for what real spiritual growth looks like. The world may not see it. There may be no medals, no recognition, no visible transformation for a long time. But inside, the roots are deepening. A person sits, breathes, forgives, questions, lets go, learns to be kind without reward. And on the outside, it might look like nothing. But inside, foundations are being built. That's how Dharma works. It grows in silence, and when it blooms, it doesn't need to be announced. Bamboo doesn't ask to be praised. It doesn't stop growing because no one's watching. It doesn't compare itself to the flower beside it or the tree across the field. It simply follows its nature, slowly, patiently. And that's the invitation Buddhism gives to every being. Grow anyway, even when no one sees, even when no one claps, even when the world is too busy to notice the progress you've made. Grow anyway. One of the core teachings in Buddhist thought is that craving leads to suffering, and craving for recognition is one of the deepest cravings of all. It's subtle. It hides behind good deeds, accomplishments, wisdom, even spiritual practice. The ego whispers, "Be good so they notice, be wise so they admire, be kind so they'll thank you." And without even realizing, people become trapped in a cycle, doing the right things, not for truth, but for credit. But the bamboo doesn't care who sees it. And that's why it's strong. That's why it bends in storms, but never breaks. Because it doesn't grow for the spotlight. It grows for the root. In the Dhammapada, one of the earliest collections of the Buddha's words, there is a verse that says, "As a solid rock is not shaken by the wind, so the wise are not moved by praise or blame." That's bamboo. Flexible, but grounded. It doesn't rise just because it's time to impress. It rises when it's ready. It rises after years of unseen discipline. And when it does, it needs no explanation. This is why some of the most awakened people go unnoticed. They don't wear their wisdom. They don't seek followers. Their peace isn't loud. It's woven into their presence, their silence, their way of seeing the world. They might be a gardener, a janitor, a school teacher, a stranger on a bench. No fanfare, no titles. But their roots are deep. Their growth was earned in private. They are bamboo. This growth doesn't come from reading quotes or collecting teachings. It comes from practice, real, steady, daily work. Breathing through pain, letting go when it hurts, being kind when it's not easy, accepting what can't be changed, showing up again and again, even when it feels like no progress is being made. In Buddhist monasteries, monks chant the same verses every day, not to be original, not to entertain, but because repetition deepens the roots. It's not about novelty, it's about rhythm, commitment, alignment with truth. And just like bamboo, that repetition slowly builds strength, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that endures. There's something humbling about watching someone grow in silence. Someone who used to react now listens. Someone who once clung now lets go. Someone who was once angry now offers patience. And when you ask them how they changed, they often can't give you a dramatic answer, because the change didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, day by day, root by root. Bamboo also teaches something else: emptiness. If you cut open a stalk of bamboo, you find it's hollow. That hollow space is not a flaw. It's what gives bamboo its flexibility, its ability to sway with the wind, to move without snapping, to grow without becoming rigid. In Mahayana Buddhism, emptiness, or shunyata, is seen not as nothingness, but as openness. Space, the absence of ego, the absence of fixed self. And this is where the metaphor deepens. A person who grows without applause also grows without ego. They become light, resilient, not inflated with pride, not frozen by insecurity. They can bend without breaking, fall without losing dignity, change without fearing loss of identity, because their self isn't built on being seen, it's built on truth. In a world obsessed with speed, bamboo offers another gift: patience. It doesn't rush. It doesn't panic when results don't show right away. It trusts its process. And that kind of trust is rare today. People want instant transformation, instant healing, instant purpose. But deep change never happens in haste. It happens like bamboo. Slowly, quietly, hidden until it's strong enough to rise. That kind of growth won't go viral. It won't get a standing ovation, but it will change your life. It will build a foundation inside you that no criticism can shake, no failure can erase, no loss can destroy, because it was never built for anyone else. It was never about being watched. It was about being real. And when that kind of strength is built, it doesn't just stay inside. It flows outward, not loudly, but consistently. People feel safer around you. Your words carry weight, not because they're loud, but because they come from depth. You don't need to convince anyone anymore. You simply are. That's enough. There's a saying in Zen, "Let your actions be silent teachings." That's bamboo. No big speeches, no billboards, just presence, just being. And slowly, others around you begin to shift, not because you told them to, but because your quiet strength reminded them of their own. This is the invitation Buddhism gives. Grow without noise. Cultivate depth without needing display. Let your roots be deeper than your branches are visible. Let your peace be anchored in something no one else can see or steal. And when you feel tired, when it feels like you're making no progress, like nothing is changing, remember the bamboo. Remember the years spent underground. Remember that the strongest beings often go unnoticed, until one day they rise, and they rise with grace, not ego, with stillness, not performance, with emptiness that holds everything. So keep going, keep practicing, Keep growing in silence, because the Dharma isn't a spotlight, it's a seed. And the most beautiful lives don't bloom for the applause. They bloom because they were always meant to. And once the bamboo has risen, silent and steady, something deeper begins to loosen, an old shadow carried by almost everyone. The belief that mistakes define a person, that the past holds permanent weight, that certain choices, certain regrets, are too heavy to ever fully leave behind. But Buddhism teaches otherwise. It teaches that the weight is not in the past, it's in the clinging to it. Now we step into one of the most misunderstood truths of the path. You are not the karma you were given. There's a pain that doesn't scream, but it shapes lives. The pain of believing that what's been done to you or by you seals your fate. Some carry shame for years, thinking it proves they are honest. Others carry guilt like it's a badge of maturity. Some hold resentment as if it keeps them safe. And all of it, every drop, becomes a story about who they are. But early Buddhist teachings show something completely different. Karma is not identity. Karma is action, not punishment, not destiny, not a tattoo burned into your soul. Karma is choice, unfolding moment by moment, and most importantly, karma can change. This changes everything, because it means that what you've done or what's been done to you does not make you unworthy. It doesn't stain your soul. It doesn't decide who you are forever. You may have carried it like a scar, repeated it like a story, feared it like a curse. But that story can stop. Not by erasing the past, but by waking up in the present. The Pali word karma literally means action. Not result, not punishment, not fate, action. The Buddha taught that every moment of awareness is a new beginning, a new direction. What matters is not what came before, but how fully you show up now. You are not dragging a life sentence, you are holding a steering wheel. But here's the hard part. People often find comfort in thinking the past defines them. It gives pain a place. It gives failure a script. This is who I am because of what happened. This is all I deserve because of what I did. The identity becomes heavy, but it also becomes familiar. And Buddhism gently, persistently breaks that illusion apart. You are not your memories. You are not your worst day. You are not the harm others projected onto you. You are not the harm you once caused in ignorance. You are the awareness seeing it all now. The ability to choose differently today, that's who you are. Not the echoes, not the bruises, not the regrets. The Buddha didn't teach perfection. He taught liberation through understanding. He didn't say, become flawless. He said, see clearly. And what you'll see when you look with clear eyes is this: no karma is final. No past has the authority to define your present unless you give it permission. And if someone told you otherwise, if a voice in your life said, you'll never change, or you'll always be this way, they were wrong, not just spiritually, but factually. Because even the most basic teachings in Buddhist psychology show that the mind is always changing. Thoughts change, emotions shift, patterns unravel. And with each moment of awareness, the future bends. Some traditions speak of vipaka, the result of past karma. But even that is not fixed. Even consequences can become teachers instead of punishments. A difficult life does not mean a worthless one. A painful past does not mean a doomed path. Even hardship, when met with wisdom, becomes a doorway. There are countless stories in the Buddhist canon of murderers, thieves, and cruel kings who became monks, teachers, enlightened ones. Not because their karma was erased, but because they stopped adding to it. They stopped clinging to their identity. They saw through it. And from that clarity, they changed their direction. The story of Angulimala is one of the most powerful. He was a feared killer. But when he met the Buddha, something cracked open in him. He laid down his weapon, became a monk, and was later known not for his crimes, but for his peace. People still judged him. They didn't believe he could change. But the Buddha did, because the Buddha didn't see a criminal. He saw potential, the same potential that lives in everyone, waiting to be uncovered. You are not the karma you inherited from your family, not the trauma passed down, not the beliefs they gave you. You are not the mistakes of your past self, not the actions born from fear, confusion, pain. Those may have shaped you, but they are not you. They are conditions. You are the one who now chooses how to meet them. When awareness meets karma, something extraordinary happens. It stops being a weight and starts becoming a teacher. A broken pattern becomes a chance to respond instead of repeat. A painful memory becomes an opportunity to soften, not harden. A mistake becomes a moment of humility, not shame. That is transformation. That is what Buddhism offers. Not a fresh start by erasing the past, but a deep, honest start by seeing it clearly and stepping forward anyway. There's a line in the suttas that says, "Just as a storm cannot move a mountain, the wise are not moved by praise or blame." You don't become wise by avoiding storms. You become wise by seeing through the storm, realizing you are not the weather of your past, but the mountain of your awareness. And when that awareness is steady, the past stops controlling the present. You no longer make decisions based on guilt. You don't react from old wounds. You don't need to keep punishing yourself to prove you've changed. You simply stop repeating. That's the real power. Not to be perfect, but to be free. Some carry karma like a secret scar, convinced they must carry it alone. But in the Sangha, the spiritual community, this belief is gently dismantled. Everyone is carrying something. Everyone has regrets, old pain, moments of blindness, but they are not barriers. They are the raw material of compassion. The more we see this in ourselves, the more we see it in others. That's how karma softens. That's how it dissolves, not by being denied, but by being met with full presence. And that presence doesn't just free you, it frees the people around you. Because when you stop identifying with your past, you also stop reducing others to theirs. You start seeing people not as what they've done, but as what they're capable of becoming. That's not idealism. That's wisdom. This shift, seeing karma as unfolding action rather than identity, is one of the greatest medicines Buddhism has to offer. It means your value is not held hostage by what you've been through. It means redemption isn't a performance. It's a quiet decision. A breath taken with clarity. A moment of non-harm where once there was harm. Even if no one else believes you've changed, even if no one sees the effort you've made, that doesn't diminish its truth. Growth is not measured by applause. It's measured by what you stop doing, what you no longer feed, what you refuse to repeat. That invisible work is the most powerful karma of all. You may not be able to change what you've done, but you can change how you meet it now. You can offer it compassion. You can use it as fuel for tenderness. You can use it to guide others. That's how karma becomes a path, not a prison. So the next time shame rises like a wave, trying to convince you you're unworthy, pause, feel it, bow to it. Then let it pass. Don't argue, don't believe it. Just return to the breath, the now, the stillness that no past can touch. Because you are not the karma you were given. You are not the labels others placed on you. You are not the echo of yesterday. You are the silence noticing it, the awareness that has always been free but forgot. The moment you remember, the moment you stop feeding the story, everything changes. And now that this weight has been lifted, now that the past has loosened its grip, we move to an even subtler truth. The body, the breath, the present form of you, it does not need to be improved. It is already enough. The breath itself, as it is right now, is already whole. And when the grip of the past loosens, when the weight of karma no longer defines your value, what remains is something shockingly simple. The breath, not a concept, not a metaphor, just the quiet, ordinary rhythm keeping you alive. The very thing you've done every moment since birth, often unnoticed, often judged, often interfered with. And now it comes into focus, not as something to fix, but as something to trust. This is where we meet the truth behind it all, the breath that needs no improvement. There is a soft wisdom in the breath that people spend their whole lives trying to find in louder places. But the breath never once asked for praise, never demanded your attention. It just kept going, through joy, through heartbreak, through shame, through awakening. It was there before you knew what self-worth meant, and it will be there when all your concepts fall apart. And what's most miraculous, it never asked you to change it, not once. In Buddhist practice, the breath is sacred, not because it's special, but because it's always here. It doesn't need to be edited. It doesn't need to be spiritualized. It only needs to be seen, felt, trusted. And for many, this is the first real act of peace, allowing the body to breathe exactly as it does, not controlling it, not upgrading it, just being with it, like an old friend you forgot you had. People are conditioned to believe that peace is something they must achieve, something earned through control, perfection, discipline. But Buddhism turns that idea inside out. It teaches that the path begins when you stop trying to fix what isn't broken. When you sit still, notice the inhale, the exhale, and finally, let it be enough. There's no prize for the deepest breath, no punishment for the shallow one. Both are valid, both are real, both pass. This is what makes breath the ultimate teacher. It reflects the truth of impermanence, of sufficiency, of effortless being. And in that reflection, the idea that you must become worthy starts to collapse. The body doesn't require your criticism. The breath doesn't need your approval. Your chest rises and falls, not because you deserve it, but because life decided you should still be here. You don't earn each breath with your performance. You receive it as a gift. And once that truth lands in the heart, even the most anxious mind begins to soften. Breathing has always been the most intimate experience of presence. It happens before thought, beneath thought, beyond thought, and it never lies. A calm breath doesn't fake peace. A shaky breath doesn't pretend. It simply reflects. It shows you what is. And in Buddhism, that honesty is everything. To meet the breath as it is, without changing it, is to meet yourself without judgment. Meditation is often misunderstood. People think they need to force the breath into stillness, to breathe like a monk, to quiet the body as if it were misbehaving. But that approach only creates more tension. The breath is not a tool to beat yourself into silence. It's a doorway to acceptance. It's the only thing you need to return to over and over. And with each return, the idea that you are not enough starts to fade. In the Anapanasati Sutta, the Buddha taught mindfulness of breathing not as a technique for the elite, but as a homecoming, a refuge, a way to train the mind without violence. The breath doesn't argue. It doesn't resist. It receives attention with open arms. Whether you're crying or laughing, broken or blooming, it stays. It adapts. It doesn't judge your emotional weather, it simply moves. Think of how often the body has been blamed for not looking a certain way, for not aging slower, for reacting to stress, for needing rest. And yet, the breath remains faithful. It doesn't stop because you're upset. It doesn't hold back because you're ungrateful. It keeps going. That's what makes it holy. And the most profound part, you don't need to understand anything to be with it. No doctrine, no philosophy, no experience. You just sit and feel and let it be. And in doing so, you begin to feel the truth that Buddhist practice points to. Being alive is already enough. The breath is the anti-perfection. It doesn't strive. It doesn't seek. It doesn't compete. It just flows. This is the lesson the world has forgotten. In a culture that teaches endless self-improvement, the breath teaches self-permission. Permission to be flawed, to be unfinished, to be human. Not tomorrow, not when healed, now. And this isn't passivity. It's not about giving up. It's about starting from peace instead of chasing it. You don't have to change your breath to be present. You don't have to upgrade your emotions to be spiritual. You just have to return, again and again. And in that return, the war inside ends. In monastic life, there are entire days dedicated to breath awareness, not as a retreat, but as a discipline of gentleness, a commitment to not pushing, a vow to stop running. And in that space, monks discover something revolutionary. The body is not an obstacle, it's a teacher, not because it's perfect, but because it's alive. Every exhale is a letting go. Every inhale is a receiving. Nothing is hoarded. Nothing is forced. That's what makes the breath a model of generosity, a model of trust. It gives and releases with no resistance. And slowly, by watching it, the heart begins to learn how to do the same. You don't need to fix your breath before it can heal you. You don't need to control it for it to guide you. You just need to stop fighting it. And in that surrender, peace emerges. Not as a reward, but as your original state, rediscovered. Many people have been told their bodies are not good enough, not strong enough, not beautiful enough, not calm enough. But Buddhism doesn't see it that way. It teaches that the body, just as it is the vehicle to awakening, not in spite of its imperfections, but because of them. The breath reminds you that life is not a performance. It's a rhythm. And every time you return to it, without manipulation, you step out of your mind and into the present. And the present is always enough. That's not a poetic line. It's a truth that can be touched, felt, breathed. When your breath shortens in fear, it's not failing, it's informing. When it deepens in calm, it's not boasting, it's reflecting. When it's ragged, restless, uneven, it's still worthy. And so are you. That is the gift of this lesson. To meet your breath like a friend, you no longer need to impress. There is no enlightenment that ignores the body. There is no awakening that bypasses the breath. The path begins and ends right here. In the inhale that needs no upgrade. In the exhale that asks nothing in return. In the space between that contains everything, including you. So, as you sit, or lie, or walk, let the breath be your anchor. Let it teach you how to stay, how to soften, how to be with yourself without needing to earn your own presence. That is the quiet revolution Buddhism offers, to breathe as you are and to know that is enough. And once the breath is seen as complete, once the body no longer needs to be improved for peace to exist, another illusion begins to collapse. The idea that pain, failure, self-doubt, or even the belief of being not enough is somehow permanent. But permanence, in Buddhism, is the grandest lie of all, because now we step into the vast truth that breaks every chain and fear the mind clings to. This is where it becomes clear. Samsara never had the final word. Samsara is not a place. It's not hellfire or punishment or even an external force. It is the endless cycle of grasping, becoming, resisting, and forgetting. The constant birth and death of moods, identities, dreams, and wounds. It is the loop of believing that what hurts now will always hurt. That who we are in our lowest moment is who we must always be. And this illusion is not just exhausting, it's cruel. But the moment it's seen clearly, the entire shape of life begins to shift. Buddhist cosmology is full of stories about beings rising and falling through realms, not because they are doomed, but because their minds change. One day a god, the next a hungry ghost, the next a human seeking truth. These aren't just fables, they are metaphors for what the mind does daily. You wake up joyful, collapse by noon, rise again by evening. Your sense of self dies and is reborn 1,000 times a week. And yet, somewhere inside, you still believe you're stuck. But you're not. Not in the feeling, not in the label, not in the version of yourself that once struggled to breathe through shame. Because no identity lasts, no suffering is eternal. No karma locks the doors forever. What keeps the wheel of samsara spinning is not fate, it's attachment. The refusal to let the moment pass, the clinging to what should be, the resistance to what is. And once that clinging is loosened, samsara loses its grip. This is why the Buddha didn't talk about fixing life. He talked about waking up from it, seeing it for what it is, a dream of permanence built on ever-shifting ground. The body changes, the mind changes, the seasons change, even your worst habits shift with enough awareness. So why would not being enough be the one thing that stays? The truth is, it never stayed. It only returned because it was fed with thought, with memory, with repetition. But it is not who you are. It's a visitor. Samsara is full of visitors. Some carry shame, some carry pride, some carry despair. But they all come to pass. They all dissolve the moment presence returns. That's why, in Buddhist practice, nothing is labeled as forever. Even enlightenment is not seen as a fixed status. It is a living, breathing awareness that must be maintained. Just like breath, just like kindness, just like letting go. You don't arrive and stop. You remain awake by continuing to release. This is why the lie of not being enough can never be true, because it is based on a frozen image of yourself, and nothing in life is frozen. You've already changed since this sentence began. The mind moved, the breath shifted, awareness flickered. What you were 5 minutes ago no longer exists. That means you are not stuck. You never were. And that truth alone is liberating. The worst moment of your life is not your identity. The most broken version of you is not your core. They are pages in a story, not the final line. Samsara is a wheel, yes, but every wheel turns. Nothing stays at the bottom, not forever. When you believe you are trapped, it's not because the trap is real. It's because the mind has mistaken a passing state for a permanent prison. But states pass, emotions fade, stories change. You've seen this 1,000 times. One day you felt hopeless. Then someone said a kind word and something shifted. That's samsara cracking open. That's the illusion showing its weakness. You are not cursed. You are not broken beyond repair. You are experiencing impermanence dressed as identity. And the moment you see that clearly, the chains fall off. You stop asking, "Will I always be this way?" and start asking, "What is here now?" That's freedom, not escape, not perfection, presence. In some Buddhist stories, even Mara, the tempter, the deceiver, visits the Buddha long after enlightenment. But the Buddha doesn't run. He doesn't panic. He says, "I see you, Mara," and Mara leaves. That is how samsara ends, not by erasing pain, but by seeing it and no longer identifying with it. You don't need to wait for a future version of yourself to be free. The opportunity is here, in this breath, in this second, because the cycle only spins when you push it. And if you stop pushing, even for a moment, it pauses. And in that pause, the truth appears. You are not the person who failed last year. You are not the identity others projected onto you. You are not the sadness that visits, or the rage that explodes, or the loneliness that lingers. You are the space in which all these things arise and fade, and because they fade, they cannot define you. Every version of you that said, "I'm not enough," is already gone. That thought came, and it went, and yet you remain. Not the thought, the one who watched it. That is your freedom. That is your power. To know that no condition is the final condition. This is not theory. It's direct experience. Look back at your life. Think of something you thought would never end. A grief, a fear, a mistake. At the time, it felt permanent. But now, it's memory. Now, it's changed. You changed. That means samsara didn't win, and it never will, unless you let it. This is why monks smile even in hardship, not because they are numb, but because they know nothing lasts. Not even pain, not even praise, not even identity. This doesn't make them passive, it makes them fearless. And in that fearlessness, they find peace, not because life becomes easy, but because they stop believing that struggle is forever. Buddhism doesn't promise a life without storms. It offers shelter within the storm. The awareness that watches the clouds but isn't made of them. And once you know you're not made of them, they lose their power. Even if they come again, they pass. Always. You are not bound to who you were. You are not owned by the thought that visits at midnight. You are not the story someone else told about you. Samsara would love for you to believe that. But it's a lie. And it's a lie that ends the moment you stop feeding it with fear. So when the thought comes, this will never change. I'll never be enough. This is just who I am. Pause. Let that thought rise. Don't push it away. Don't argue. Just see it for what it is. Movement. Not truth. Just another ripple in the river. Not the river itself. You are the river. You are the movement, but also the stillness beneath. You are the one who continues, even as identities fall away, even as feelings come and go. That's what Buddhism teaches through every story, every breath, every silence. You were never meant to stay stuck. And if samsara doesn't have the final word, then who does? Awareness, clarity, compassion. These are not fleeting. These are not visitors. These are what remain when the story ends. They don't come later. They come when you stop resisting what is. That's the truth that changes everything. The cycle spins because we forget, and it pauses the moment we remember. No self is final. No label is eternal. No suffering has the right to name you. So stay here. Stay soft. Let go again. Let life turn without trying to freeze it. Because even your struggle is a wave that passes. Even your not enoughness is a cloud that drifts. You don't need to outrun it. You just need to see that it cannot last. And now that samsara has been seen for what it is, not a trap, but a pattern that dissolves the moment presence returns, what happens next is subtle but profound. The mind begins to look around, trying to measure where it stands. How far have I come? Am I doing better than before? How do I compare to others on the path? But here's where another illusion quietly falls apart. In true Buddhist practice, there is no scale, no ruler, no scoreboard. There is no one ahead, no one behind. Because awakening is not a competition, and worth cannot be measured. This is one of the most radical truths in the Dharma, and also one of the hardest to accept, especially in a world that grades everything. From childhood, people are taught that progress means getting ahead. That growth is only real if it looks better than someone else's. That being worthy means being faster, smarter, more enlightened, more healed. But Buddhism doesn't reward speed. It doesn't worship achievement. It points instead to the present, always the present, as the only place that ever matters. There is no finish line on this path. There is no trophy waiting for the one who meditated longer, or spoke with more eloquence, or carried more rituals in their memory. A farmer in a field, tending crops with mindful breath, may be more awake than a scholar who can quote every sutta. A child who forgives may be wiser than a monk who clings to knowledge. Buddhism does not place people on ladders, it brings them to the ground. This absence of measurement is not just philosophical, it's liberating. Because the moment you stop comparing your pace, your past, your understanding, you stop suffering under the illusion that something is missing. You stop pretending that progress must be visible, impressive, or linear. Some days you'll feel clear, others you'll feel lost. But neither means you're ahead or behind. It simply means you're alive. Even within Buddhist traditions, there's a tendency for ego to sneak back in through robes, ranks, ordination levels, experience. But the deepest teachings always return to the same point. None of that defines awakening. None of that guarantees wisdom. The heart of the path is not in appearance, it's in presence, in how deeply you listen, in how honestly you sit with yourself when no one else is watching. The Buddha himself welcomed seekers from all walks of life, royals, beggars, outcasts, criminals. He did not rank their worth based on their past, their background, or how quickly they understood the teachings. He met each person where they were. Some awakened quickly, others took years, some fell and rose again. There was no shame in that, because time was never the point. The point was awareness. Think of how many people give up because they believe they're falling behind. I'm not as mindful as I should be. I still get angry. Other people seem so at peace. What's wrong with me? But these thoughts are not signs of failure. They're signs of being human. And Buddhism doesn't ask you to become anything other than that. It simply asks you to see clearly. And comparison always clouds that clarity. There is no spiritual race, no enlightenment leaderboard, no invisible judge tallying your moments of stillness. The mind craves those things because it wants control. It wants to know it's winning. But the soul doesn't need to win. It only needs to return. This is why some of the most awakened people seem so ordinary. They don't glow with cosmic power. They don't speak in riddles. They sweep floors. They smile at dogs. They sit quietly when the room is loud. They are not impressive in the way the world defines it, but their peace is contagious. And it's not because they've reached the top. It's because they stopped climbing. When measurement disappears, something else takes its place. Compassion. You no longer see others as competitors. You don't feel envious when someone else has a breakthrough. You don't feel superior when someone else struggles. You start to see every person as a mirror of yourself, on their own path, in their own time, and the pressure melts away. This is the gift of the Dharma, a path where value is not earned, it is revealed. Slowly, gently, without a ruler in sight. You're not here to be faster, you're here to be free. And that freedom begins the moment you let go of needing to be further than you are. Some practitioners progress quickly in one area but struggle in another. Some face emotional storms for years. Others open like a flower overnight. Neither path is better. Both are complete. Both are alive. Growth is not a straight line. It's a spiral. It loops. It returns. It unfolds like a lotus, petal by petal, at its own pace. Even the idea of being on the path is a metaphor. In truth, there's nowhere to go, no destination, just deeper presence, just more honesty, just more softening. The path doesn't lead away from yourself, it leads into yourself, and no one can be ahead of you in that. because no one else is you. So, if your mind is asking, "Am I doing this right?" Pause. Breathe. Listen. The question itself comes from measurement, but your worth is not in your pace, not in your clarity, not in your stillness. It's in your being, and that being has never been behind, never been too late, never been not enough. There's a story of a monk who was always the last to understand the teachings. Others laughed. Some pitied him. But one day, during a silent sitting, he simply bowed his head and wept. In that moment, something shifted. Not because he had figured something out, but because he had finally let go of needing to. And that letting go opened a door no knowledge ever could. This is the wisdom behind the absence of measurement. The moment you stop trying to prove your worth, it begins to shine on its own. Not through effort, through presence, through not chasing, through sitting exactly where you are and knowing it is enough. You don't need to be further. You don't need to catch up. You don't need to wait for someone to declare you ready. You are not a project. You are not a spiritual resume. You are awareness, becoming aware of itself. And that process has no timeline. This also means there's no point in judging others. Their anger, their confusion, their struggles, they are not delays. They are lessons, necessary ones. The way a seed must crack before it becomes a sprout. You can't skip those stages. You can only meet them with patience. Buddhist practice is not about becoming a better version of someone else. It's about becoming more honest with yourself. And honesty doesn't need to be fast. It needs to be real. And realness blooms best without a finish line. So, when you feel discouraged, when you believe you're falling behind some imagined schedule, ask yourself, who made the schedule? Who decided what behind means? Was it you? Or was it fear, comparison, ego? Because the truth is, no one is ahead. No one is behind. There is no line to race across. Just now, just this. And every breath you take in awareness is the destination itself. And now that the race has dissolved, now that the ruler has been dropped, and the concept of ahead or behind no longer holds weight, what remains is space. But space doesn't mean isolation. It means connection. Once comparison disappears, something unexpected begins to emerge. Belonging, not to an identity, not to a group, but to existence itself. Because the truth is, you were never separate. And this next teaching, drawn from Mahayana tradition, brings that into focus in the most poetic way possible. You are the raindrop, and you belong to the ocean, not because of size or status, but because of nature. There is a loneliness that most people carry quietly. It doesn't always show up as sadness. Sometimes it's hidden under pride, busyness, even spiritual striving. But underneath it all is a whisper. I am alone. That belief shapes so much of how people move through the world. They chase relationships, achievements, recognition, even awakening. Not always because they want to grow, but because they want to feel whole. As if wholeness is something outside, waiting to be earned. But Buddhism offers another view, a deeper one, a softer one that doesn't say, become complete, but rather, you were never separate to begin with. And it teaches this through a simple metaphor, the raindrop and the ocean. A single drop of water may look small, may seem fragile. On its own, it falls, evaporates, disappears. But when it touches the ocean, something profound happens. It doesn't just join the ocean, it was the ocean all along. Its essence is water. Its nature is inseparable from the whole. The separation was never real, just a temporary form. This is how Mahayana Buddhism understands self. Not as a sealed container, but as a wave in a larger body. You are not isolated consciousness. You are consciousness moving through one particular shape for a moment. And when that moment ends, the shape changes, but the essence remains. There was no beginning, no end, just flow. And that changes everything, because if separation was an illusion, then so is unworthiness, so is loneliness, so is the belief that you must earn your place in this world. The raindrop doesn't earn the ocean. It belongs because of what it is. In meditation, this is not just a concept. It's something that can be felt. There are moments when the boundary between self and other disappears, when the breath feels like the wind, when your sadness feels like the earth's grief, when someone else's joy stirs something in you as if it were your own. That's not imagination, that's remembrance, that's your original state peeking through. This is why compassion is so central in Mahayana teachings. Because when you no longer see yourself as separate, harming another becomes unthinkable. Their pain is not distant, their fear is not foreign. It echoes in your bones, and so kindness stops being a moral rule. It becomes the most natural thing in the world, like the ocean caring for its waves. The delusion of separation creates all kinds of suffering. It fuels comparison, jealousy, self-doubt, even hatred. But all of these collapse the moment unity is seen clearly, and it's not a philosophical unity. It's not a group identity. It's the felt sense that no part of life is disconnected from life. Think of how rivers run to the sea. They may travel through different lands, carry different sediments, carve different valleys, but the destination is the same. Not because they are forced to merge, but because they were always pulled by the same gravity. That's what existence does. It gathers, it returns, it dissolves difference without denying uniqueness. You are not less because you are one drop. You are the ocean in a single note, not a fragment, a full expression. And when that sinks in, you stop grasping for confirmation. You stop needing people to see you a certain way, because you realize they are you, looking back through a different lens. This doesn't mean identity disappears entirely. It means identity is held more lightly. It stops being a cage. You can be a daughter, a friend, a teacher, a seeker. But those are roles, not truths. The truth is deeper. The truth is water, moving through a name for a while, then through another, always flowing, never apart. This is why Buddhist practice is not just about the self, it's about interbeing, not just enlightenment for you, but awakening for all. Because the ocean rises together, no wave reaches the shore alone, no healing happens in isolation. Even the smallest act, breathing with awareness, offering a kind glance, listening deeply, ripples outward. That's not metaphor. That's physics. The field of consciousness is not sealed in skin. It extends. It responds. And every peaceful thought you cultivate shifts the field for everyone. You are not here by accident. You are part of a larger whole, not in a poetic way, but in an unbreakable way. You cannot fall out of the ocean. You can forget it, yes. You can believe yourself separate, unwanted, drifting. But that forgetting never changes the truth underneath. And when you return to that truth, when you feel yourself drop back into the ocean's heart, something inside you softens. The pressure to prove something fades. The hunger to be seen calms down. You no longer have to perform your value. You can just be, like water, present, essential, enough. This is not detachment. This is intimacy, the kind that doesn't need words. When you sit under the sky and feel no barrier between your breath and the breeze, when you look into a stranger's eyes and feel something ancient stirring, that's not imagination, that's the ocean touching itself. Even in your silence, you're participating in the whole. Even when you feel lost, you are being carried. And this belonging doesn't come from doing enough. It comes from remembering that you never left. You only thought you had. This is why Mahayana Buddhism speaks of bodhicitta, the heart-mind of awakening that moves for the sake of all beings. It arises when the raindrop remembers it's the ocean, when love stops being a transaction and becomes a tide, when action flows not from obligation but from truth. You don't have to become bigger to belong. You don't have to be wiser, calmer, more enlightened. Your place is not earned, it's inherent. The water never asked the drop to prove itself. It simply received it. And so the question is not, how do I connect? The question is, what is still believing I'm separate? That belief is the final veil, and once it lifts, the sense of lack lifts with it. Because what is the self lacking when it sees there is no outside? So next time you feel small or unworthy or unsure if you're doing enough, return to the water. Not literally, internally. Feel the breath connect you to every living thing. Feel the body that arose from earth and wind. Feel the heart that longs for love, not because it's broken, but because it remembers. You were not made to be perfect. You were made to be part. And that part is not minor, it's sacred. Without your presence, something in the ocean would be missing. That's not flattery, that's truth. And now that it's clear you were never apart from the whole, now that you've remembered your place in the ocean of all things, the mind begins to release its final illusions of value. It no longer asks how big you are, how fast you've grown, how deeply you've been seen. Instead, a new kind of question arises. What am I still clinging to that keeps me from resting in this truth? And there is no better answer than the life of the Buddha himself, the awakened one who slept under trees, wore simple robes, and held nothing, yet lacked nothing. This is where real worth begins to shine, not in what you possess, but in what you no longer need. The Buddha had once been a prince. He had palaces, luxury, servants, fine food, silk sheets. He had every symbol of power the world could offer. And yet he walked away, not out of guilt or shame, but because he saw clearly that none of those things could protect him from sickness, old age, or death. None of them could stop the mind from suffering. They brought comfort, yes, but not peace. And so he left, not to become poor, but to become free. What's often forgotten is how radical this was. To trade royal comfort for wandering in forests, to sleep beneath the stars without walls, to eat only what was offered, to wear robes sewn from discarded cloth. This was not an act of drama. It was a lesson lived out loud, a lesson in emptiness, a reminder that real strength is not found in what surrounds you, but in what you no longer cling to. The Buddha taught not from a throne, but from the earth. He sat on grass, leaned against trees, walked barefoot through villages. His value was not assigned by robes or recognition. His authority came from presence, from his silence, from the peace that moved through him without effort. This is not just a historical fact. It's a spiritual teaching, one that cuts through the modern lie that worth is visible, that you can see it in status, income, possessions, platforms, influence. But the Buddha had none of these, and still people followed him across deserts, not because he looked important, but because he was grounded. There's something deeply human about wanting to hold on to roles, titles, routines, objects, identity. It gives the mind a place to rest. But Buddhism invites you to rest without those things, to be still, not because your life is organized, but because your heart no longer needs to grasp. When the Buddha slept under trees, he showed the world that safety does not come from locks and walls. That shelter is not always a structure. It can be an inner steadiness, a trust in the unfolding, a peace that moves with you even in uncertain places. That is why so many of his teachings happened outdoors, in groves, in caves, in open fields, because the Dharma doesn't live in temples. It lives in presence. He didn't teach that poverty is holy. He taught that attachment is suffering. Whether you own much or little, the real question is, what owns you? The Buddha wasn't against having things. He was against being trapped by them. The robes he wore weren't symbolic. They were functional, loose, light, allowing movement, just like his mind, free to respond, free to adapt. In modern life, people are praised for accumulation. The more you have, the more successful you're seen to be. But accumulation often hides fear. Fear of being nobody, fear of being forgotten, fear of silence. That's why it's so powerful to remember the Buddha had no house, and yet he was at home wherever he went. This doesn't mean you must give everything away. It means your peace cannot depend on what you hold. The moment you need the car, the job, the image, the routine, the praise in order to feel safe, that's the moment they begin to own you. The Buddha let go so he could carry nothing but clarity. And clarity travels light. There's a story of a monk who brought a beautiful bowl to the Buddha, hoping it would please him. The Buddha thanked him, then gently placed it on the ground. A few minutes later, he accidentally stepped on it and cracked it. The monk gasped, but the Buddha simply smiled and said, "It was already broken." That's how he saw the world, not with fear, but with understanding. Nothing lasts, so why cling? The Buddha's emptiness wasn't cold or detached. It was luminous. It allowed him to connect more deeply, not less. Because he didn't need anything from others, he could truly see them. Because he wasn't defending an identity, he could listen without fear. That kind of freedom is rare, but it's possible, not by copying his life, but by following his insight. Clinging is subtle. It hides in attachment to praise, to routine, even to your own ideas about awakening. The Buddha let go of comfort, but also of ideology. He didn't tell people what to believe. He asked them to see for themselves. That's how deeply he trusted emptiness. He let even his own teachings be questioned. Sleeping under trees doesn't just mean rejecting materialism. It means surrendering the need to control life, letting the world change, letting the body age, letting the mind shift, letting others come and go without forcing connection. It means living in such deep harmony with reality that you no longer resist impermanence. You move with it. Some of the most awakened beings live simple lives. You might pass them on the street and never notice. They don't need to prove themselves. Their stillness speaks louder than any robe. Their kindness isn't broadcast. Their humility doesn't shrink them. It makes them expansive. They may not have followers or platforms, but the people who meet them feel seen, not impressed. That's what the Buddha's life teaches. Worth isn't in your appearance, not in your house, your voice, your plans. It's in how freely you can let go, in how gently you can meet change, in how little you need to be enough. He could have lived in gold halls. He chose the forest, not as punishment, but as proof. That peace doesn't come from comfort. It comes from release, from shedding the layers that were never you, from sitting on the earth, exposed, and still feeling whole. And this isn't about doing more. It's about carrying less story, less defense, less ambition. The Buddha didn't tell people to climb higher. He invited them to sit down, to stop seeking, to feel what's already present beneath the noise. Even now, centuries later, his teachings haven't aged, because truth doesn't expire. It doesn't need updating. The silence that held him as he lay beneath the trees is the same silence available to you now. It doesn't require perfect posture or perfect understanding. It only requires your presence. The worth that lived in the Buddha lives in you, not because you've earned it, but because it was never missing, even when you forget, even when you cling, even when you fall back into fear. It waits, quiet, whole, untouched. So when you feel unworthy, ask yourself, not what can I add, but what can I release? Not how can I fix myself, but what am I holding that no longer serves? The answers don't always come fast, but the questions open the gate. And now that the image of the Buddha resting under trees has settled, now that the truth has been felt in the quiet between possessions and the stillness beyond appearances, there's a deeper realization that begins to unfold, one that cuts through the core of modern identity, modern success, modern anxiety. It's the realization that being was never something to prove, and peace was never something to earn. Because Buddhist practice isn't a contest of progress, it's a path of returning. You don't work your way into worth, you uncover what was never lost. This is the Dhamma of undeserved peace. There's a trap so many fall into without realizing. It sounds like this: I'll rest when I've earned it. I'll be kind to myself after I improve. I'll feel good enough once I accomplish more. That voice doesn't shout, it whispers. It sits quietly behind your goals, your healing, even your spiritual practice, and it turns peace into a prize. But Buddhism calls that what it is: delusion. From the very beginning, the Buddha taught that liberation is not something given. It's not a transaction. It's not a carrot on a stick, handed to the deserving. Peace doesn't arrive after you've finally become good enough. Peace is what remains when you stop trying to earn your existence. In the West, worth is tied to effort. To value something is to work hard for it. To relax is a privilege you buy with productivity. But the Dhamma tells a different story. It tells you that your right to stillness was never tied to your performance, that your being was never something the universe demanded you prove. And this isn't laziness, it's not passivity. It's a radical reorientation of the mind, because when you stop striving to be enough, your actions become rooted in love instead of fear. You don't meditate to improve yourself. You meditate because stillness is already your nature. You don't practice generosity to be a good person. You practice it because kindness is how your true self breathes. The difference is subtle, but life-changing. Think of how many people do the right things for the wrong reasons. They speak with compassion while feeling empty inside. They pursue spirituality as if it were a job title. They treat self-improvement as a form of punishment. But the Buddha saw all of that as more craving. Craving for worth, craving for confirmation. And craving, no matter how noble it appears, leads to suffering. So he pointed to the middle way, not indulgence, not denial, just the path of enoughness, the path where you don't escape the world, but you stop trying to conquer it. You stop using effort to replace presence. And you begin to trust the simplest truth of all, that awareness, pure and still, is enough. There's a reason the Buddha called his teachings a return, not an ascent, not a climb, but a coming back, back to the breath, back to the body, back to the moment. Because what you're looking for isn't in the future. It's not hidden behind progress. It's resting beneath the layers of trying. Even the Noble Eightfold Path, with all its wisdom, is not a ladder. It's a circle, a wheel. Something you walk again and again, not to become more valuable, but to remember your original wholeness. The path doesn't make you worthy. It reveals that you already are. But this is hard for the ego to accept. The ego is addicted to reward, to being the best, to hearing you've finally arrived. So it turns spirituality into a game. Who sits the longest? Who chants the best? Who understands emptiness first? But the Buddha didn't play that game. He sat beneath a tree and said, "Stop running." Not because there's nothing to do, but because doing is not the way to being. This is why Buddhism often feels paradoxical. It tells you to practice, but not to seek, to work, but not to strive, to let go even as you engage. But this paradox is not confusion. It's clarity. It breaks the idea that peace is a goalpost, that presence is a trophy. It frees you from the trap of spiritual achievement. And once that's seen, your whole relationship to effort changes. You no longer meditate to reach enlightenment. You meditate because sitting in your own breath is the most honest place to be. You no longer chase inner peace. You open to what's already still beneath the chase. And you begin to see that no matter how messy life is, there is a part of you that doesn't need fixing. This doesn't mean you stop growing. It means growth stops being punishment. It becomes play, exploration, curiosity. You study not to become smarter, but because learning is joyful. You heal not to make yourself acceptable, but because you're tired of carrying pain. You serve not to be validated, but because your hands are steady and your heart wants to give. The shift is subtle but profound. It's the difference between running toward a finish line and sitting in the grass with your eyes open. It's the difference between thinking peace is over there and realizing it was under your feet all along. Even the idea of undeserved peace begins to fade, because in Buddhism there is no one to deserve or undeserve. There is no fixed self receiving blessings. There is only awareness unfolding. And awareness, by nature, is peaceful until it forgets. The Dhamma doesn't ask, "Are you worthy?" It asks, "Are you present?" That's all. Because presence dissolves the whole question of worth. In presence there is no measuring stick, no standard, no spiritual scoreboard. There's only breath, body, sky, silence, and in that, you're not better, you're not worse, you're just here. And that's the secret. The reason peace feels so hard to reach is because the mind believes it must first become more, but being is not earned, it's remembered. Beneath the striving, beneath the self-improvement, beneath the guilt, there is stillness waiting. Not as a reward, but as a constant. Even in pain, it's there. Even in failure, even in heartbreak. That's what makes it powerful. Not that peace shows up when everything's perfect, but that it was already present, even when you were falling apart. This is why the Buddha never said, "Become extraordinary." He said, "Wake up." Because waking up isn't about rising above your life. It's about seeing it clearly, without filters, without needing it to be anything but what it is. And when that clarity arrives, even for a moment, you stop asking to be enough. You stop trying to fix every thought. You stop apologizing for existing. You just breathe. And in that breath, you are free. Not because you've earned it, but because you've remembered. So the next time you feel the itch to prove, to strive, to justify your peace, pause. Feel the breath, watch the sky, touch the silence that's holding everything. And know this, you're allowed to rest. You're allowed to feel calm, even if you didn't earn it today. You're allowed to stop. Because in the Dhamma, the most radical act is not effort, it's presence. The most revolutionary path is not climbing, it's returning. And the most sacred truth is this: you are already enough, not someday, not when you're healed, right now. And once the search for peace ends, not in reward, but in remembrance, something even quieter starts to rise from within. Not pride, not accomplishment, but reverence. A kind of gentle awe that doesn't look outward for approval or upward for blessing, but inward, towards something older than striving, deeper than success, untouched by fear. This next lesson is not about submission, but recognition, because when the mind truly bows, it does not bow to hierarchy, it bows to itself. And in that gesture, something sacred wakes up, not because it was created, but because it was finally seen. In Buddhist tradition, bowing is misunderstood by many. It is not a display of inferiority. It is not a form of self-erasure. It is not directed to a person, but to presence. When a monk bows before a statue of the Buddha, it's not worship. It's a reminder, a mirror, a way of saying, that which awakened in you can awaken in me. It's not about submission to someone else's greatness. It's about remembering your own. But that kind of bowing doesn't begin with hands pressed together or heads lowered. It begins in the mind. In the moment, the mind stops fighting itself, stops proving, stops criticizing, stops demanding that every flaw be erased before respect can be felt. Because the deepest act of reverence is not what you show others, It's how you sit with yourself when no one else is watching. There's a soft but powerful shift that happens when the mind learns to bow to itself. The harsh inner voice that used to push, blame, or belittle starts to quiet. The guilt that once drove every action starts to dissolve. Not because the self becomes perfect, but because the self is finally seen as already worthy. Not after improvement, but before it. The bow is not earned, it's remembered. In many monasteries, monks begin and end the day with prostrations, kneeling, touching their foreheads to the earth. It might look like surrender to authority, but what's really happening is far more intimate. It's a ritual of humility, not in the sense of lowering oneself, but of releasing the need to be above. It's a way of saying, I trust the ground, I trust this moment, I trust the awareness that sees both my light and shadow. This is what it means to bow inward, to not wait for perfection before offering kindness, to not demand achievement before allowing stillness. The mind that bows to itself is not narcissistic. It is free, because it no longer places value outside. It no longer waits for applause to feel real. Think of how long you've gone seeking approval from the world. Teachers, parents, lovers, strangers. And every time it came, it vanished quickly. No compliment lasted. No recognition stayed. But when reverence turns inward, something changes. The need to be seen fades, because you're already looking, deeply, gently, without conditions. This doesn't mean ego is being fed. It means ego is being put down, not crushed, not judged, just released. The mind that bows to itself sees both its confusion and clarity and says, yes, you too are part of the path. Nothing is excluded, not the anger, not the grief, not the doubt. They are all met with dignity. That's what true reverence looks like. Not worship of the ideal, but welcome of the whole. The Buddha never claimed to be a god. He said, I am awake. And then he taught others to find that same awakening inside themselves, not through emulation, but through returning. That's why bowing to the Buddha is also bowing to yourself. Because the Buddha nature is not far away. It's the silence beneath your thoughts, the awareness behind your eyes, the love that hasn't left even when you did. And this doesn't require ceremony. You don't need incense or robes or chants. You can bow to yourself in the middle of a breakdown. You can bow in a hospital room, in a traffic jam, in silence after failure. What matters is not the posture. It's the pause. The moment you stop judging and start witnessing, that's the real bow. In Mahayana Buddhism, there's a teaching that every being has Buddha nature. Not might have, not will have. Has already, right now. Even if they're lost, even if they're angry, even if they've forgotten. And this means that every moment you refuse to see your own worth, you are closing your eyes to that truth. Not because it disappeared, but because your mind did. To bow is to open your eyes again, to see the part of you that has never been stained, no matter what's happened, the part that was whole before the story began. And it's not hidden. It's not reserved for the few. It's closer than your breath. The only reason it feels distant is because the mind keeps moving, trying, proving. But the bow stops all of that. It says, "This is enough. I am enough. Now." Even if your life has been full of mistakes, even if shame has followed you like a shadow, even if you've spent years in noise and distraction, the bow is still there, waiting. The Buddha once said, "Just as the ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so too does the Dhamma have one taste, the taste of freedom." That freedom is felt not when you rise above, but when you bow into what's already here. There's a great power in surrendering the need to be someone, to release the performance, to sit with your ordinary breath and see it as sacred. That's not weakness. That's not giving up. That's returning. That's reverence. And when the mind begins to bow to itself, compassion flows more easily. You stop being so hard on others. You stop measuring their worth with invisible standards, because you've stopped doing it to yourself. You begin to recognize the Buddha in every face, not as a metaphor, but as a lived truth. You start noticing how even strangers are struggling to feel worthy, how every angry word hides fear, how every harsh act hides a plea for belonging. And in seeing that, you stop needing to win. You stop needing to be right. You just want to be kind. That's the fruit of bowing, not submission, but connection. And this connection changes how you live. You stop chasing things that dim your light. You stop pretending to enjoy things that exhaust you. You speak less, but with more meaning. You move slower, but with more presence. You no longer chase being seen. You focus on seeing yourself, others, the moment. Bowing to yourself doesn't mean isolation. It means inclusion of every part, every mistake, every forgotten strength. You don't reject your humanity. You embrace it so fully that even the broken pieces shine. That's what the Buddha meant when he said that suffering ends not through avoidance, but through understanding. The bow is that understanding made real, made physical. It is the body saying, "I release," the breath saying, "I accept," the mind saying, "I am enough, even here." And when that happens, you don't rise stronger. You rise softer, wiser, more whole. And that wholeness is not an end point. It's a way of being, a way of moving through the world with dignity that doesn't need to be loud, a kind of quiet strength that holds space for all your contradictions without needing to fix them. So the next time the old voice returns, the one that demands more proof, more improvement, more perfection, stop. Don't argue. Just bow, inwardly, softly, as if touching the earth with your mind, as if placing your heart gently into your own hands. That is enough. And now that the mind has learned to bow, not to a throne, not to an ideal, but to the quiet presence within itself, what follows is not pride or praise. What follows is stillness, a stillness that does not demand to be filled, a presence that does not reach outward for confirmation. This is where the teaching deepens into something rare, a state that the world does not often recognize, but that Zen speaks of in metaphor, the cup that holds itself, wholeness without overflow, fullness without grasping, enough as it is. Most people are raised in a world that values overflowing productivity, overflowing generosity, overflowing attention. The more you give, the more you are praised. The more you pour out, the more you are celebrated. But rarely does anyone stop to ask, what happens to the cup when it is always pouring? What happens when your sense of worth is tied to how much you give away? Slowly, silently, the center collapses, and no one sees it because the pouring looks like love. But Zen invites a different image. A cup that holds itself, not because it is selfish, not because it is closed, but because it is balanced, aware, able to contain what is necessary without spilling it in every direction. This is not about isolation, it's about integrity, the ability to hold one's own energy, to remain undisturbed, not because you are detached, but because you are whole. Self-containment in Zen is not repression. It's not coldness. It's spacious awareness. It's the ability to be with your feelings without needing to bleed them onto others. It's the ability to listen without reacting, to care without collapsing, to give without being emptied. The cup that holds itself doesn't need to prove it has something to offer. It offers through presence. It doesn't overflow in search of validation. It rests in quiet usefulness. And when it gives from fullness, not from hunger. That's what makes it sustainable. That's what makes it real. In the Zen tradition, silence is often valued more than explanation, because silence is not lack. Silence is containment. It is the space where wisdom brews, where emotions can rise and settle without being projected. A Zen master once said, "The quieter you become, the more you can hear." But what's also true is, the quieter you become, the more you can hold without spilling. To be a cup that holds itself means you no longer seek others to complete you. You love, but not to be filled. You serve, but not to be seen. You speak, but not to dominate. Your presence is not conditional. It is grounded, steady, enough. And this kind of steadiness is rare in a culture that celebrates extremes. Loud emotions, grand gestures, public healing. But Zen is not impressed by how much you reveal. Zen is impressed by how deeply you know what you do not need to express. This is not secrecy, it is sacredness, the understanding that not everything must be given away to be real. There is a quiet power in being able to sit with yourself and not require anyone else to rescue you from your feelings, not to push people away, but to meet yourself fully first. Most suffering comes from overflow, from leaking energy into every space, from offering your center before it has formed. But when you become the cup that holds itself, you no longer leak. You contain, you choose, you respond. This doesn't mean you become rigid. A cup is not a prison. It is a shape, a boundary. It welcomes what is poured into it, but it does not surrender its form. In the same way, the self that has learned to contain its own energy welcomes experience, welcomes love, welcomes joy, but is not defined by them. It does not spill just because something touches its surface. Zen practice is filled with rituals that teach this containment: mindful walking, silent sitting, serving tea. Each action is a vessel, a way to channel attention. And the purpose is not perfection. The purpose is presence. You are not being polished, you are being anchored, so that you may hold what life gives you without needing to rush toward or run away. The cup that holds itself is not immune to pain. It feels fully. but it does not collapse. It allows grief to fill it. Then release. It allows joy to enter. Then pass. It does not try to grasp. It does not try to hoard. It holds, with clarity, with breath. And this kind of self-containment creates freedom, because you are no longer dependent on others to regulate you. You are no longer at the mercy of praise or rejection. You don't need to be reassured every time you act. You don't need to leak your insecurity into every room. You know where you end. You know what you carry. And that knowledge gives you space to listen, space to serve, space to exist without fear of disappearing. This is why Zen monks bow to their bowls, why they fold their robes with care. Not out of ritual obsession, but because everything that holds deserves reverence, including the self, especially the self. Because when the self becomes a steady vessel, everything it touches becomes steadier too. A person who contains themselves doesn't rush to interrupt. They do not dominate conversations. They do not make their sadness louder than the room. They make space. And in that space, others begin to relax. Because there is no pressure to perform, no urgency to react, just presence, just quiet permission to be. In this way, containment becomes a gift, not a wall, a gift. You are saying, "You are safe with me, because I am not spilling onto you. I am not using you to fix my chaos. I am meeting you from wholeness." That is intimacy at its highest form, not fusion, but respectful union, not control, but communion. And all of this begins, not in practice, but in recognition. The moment you see that you do not need to chase overflow to prove your worth, you begin to soften. You stop over-explaining. You stop trying to be impressive. You stop rescuing everyone so you feel important. You just rest in yourself. And let that be enough. The cup that holds itself is not afraid to say no, not from defense, but from clarity. It knows when to give and when to wait. It doesn't apologize for resting. It doesn't perform exhaustion as virtue. It simply lives from center. And when the time comes to pour, it pours cleanly, with direction, with choice. You may still feel pulled to spill, to offer more than you have, to speak more than you mean. That's human. But now you know. You know there's another way, a way of being full and still, a way of holding your presence like water that doesn't need to flood in order to feel real. And once you taste that way of being, you begin to trust it. You no longer need to show your heart to prove you have one. You no longer need to weep loudly to be heard. You can sit quietly in your own presence, and the world begins to feel more bearable. Not because it changed, but because you did. This is why the cup that holds itself is not cold, it is not distant, it is not closed. It is wise, it is attuned, it is deeply loving, but that love begins inward, not as indulgence, as respect, as care. And only from that inward fullness can anything real flow outward. So next time you feel the urge to give past your limit, pause. Next time you feel invisible unless you speak, pause. Next time you try to save someone before you've steadied yourself, pause and ask, is this coming from overflow or from wholeness? Because you are allowed to hold yourself first. You are allowed to be the vessel before becoming the river. That is not selfishness. that is sanity, that is peace. And once the cup holds itself, once presence no longer spills in search of approval or overflows from a fear of being unseen, a deeper silence settles in. Not emptiness, but clarity. The clarity that arises when there's no longer a need to prove anything, fix anything, outperform anyone. But there's a reason that pressure ever existed. Beneath all striving, all restlessness, all judgment, lies a single mistaken idea that there is a solid, permanent self who can win or lose. That idea keeps the comparison alive. But what if it's not true? What if there was never a fixed you to measure at all? This is where the teachings of anatta, no self, begin to dissolve the very foundation of competition. The Buddha did not teach that there is no personality, no history, no memory. He taught that what people call a self is not a thing, it's a process. A river of sensations, thoughts, emotions, beliefs, perceptions, always changing, never the same. The idea of a fixed identity is an illusion the mind clings to because it craves control. But Buddhism shows that this craving causes suffering. Because once you believe there's a static you, then every success becomes personal. Every failure becomes personal. Every difference becomes a reason to feel more or less than someone else. And that creates the mental prison of comparison. You are not the same person you were 10 years ago, or 1 year ago, or yesterday. Your opinions changed, your memories shifted, your body renewed itself. Even your face has aged and transformed. So who exactly is this you being measured? Who is it that is not enough? Anatta is not a philosophy meant to confuse. It's a key. It's a reminder that identity is a habit, not a truth. It's a mask that gets mistaken for a face. The mind builds an image and then spends years trying to protect it. But once you see that there's no fixed thing to protect, everything softens. You stop defending the self because there is no one to defend. You stop comparing the self because there is no one to compete with. Think of how comparison works. Someone else is more beautiful, more successful, more wise. So what? If the self is not fixed, then who is the you that is falling short? It's not the real you. It's a mental image, a temporary sketch, and that sketch changes every time the light shifts. So the moment you stop believing it, you stop suffering. The ego, however, hates this. The ego wants to exist as something solid, something better, something justified. It survives by comparison. It says, "You're better than them," and it grows. It says, "You're worse than them," and it still grows. Whether inflated or crushed, it feeds off measurement. But when the mind truly understands anatta, the ego starves, because there's no one left to measure. There's only awareness, flowing moment to moment. This doesn't mean you lose your personality. You still speak, you still feel, you still have a name, a story, a voice, but none of those things define you. They are expressions, not identity. And once you know that, comparison becomes pointless. You can admire someone's beauty without questioning your own. You can celebrate someone's success without doubting your path, because their light doesn't dim yours. Their joy doesn't threaten your place. Without a fixed self, life becomes more like music. Every note is unique. No note is better. No note is behind. Each has its place. Each arises and dissolves. There's no need to compare a flute to a drum. No need to ask which breeze is better. The rain doesn't feel inferior to the snow. It just falls. And you too can live that way if you stop believing that you are a thing. When you drop the idea of a solid self, something else arises: freedom. You are free to evolve, free to change your mind, free to fail without shame, because nothing sticks. There's no core that's been damaged, just movement, just learning. Even jealousy begins to fade, not through suppression, but through insight. Jealousy only exists when there's a belief that someone else's joy means something about your lack. But once the self is no longer a measuring stick, other people's happiness becomes light. You absorb it instead of resisting it. You bless it instead of envying it. In meditation, this becomes clear. You sit, thoughts come, memories pass, a wave of emotion rises and falls, and through it all there is awareness, watching, breathing, holding. That awareness is not a person. It has no gender, no job, no social status. It's not jealous, it's not proud. It just sees, and that seeing is who you really are. When the Buddha spoke of liberation, he wasn't talking about becoming a better version of yourself. He was talking about releasing the illusion that there is a self to improve. That's why he smiled. Because the moment you stop gripping identity, you stop drowning in comparison. You don't need to outshine anyone. You just need to see clearly. And this clarity changes everything. You start moving through the world with less urgency. You speak more honestly because you're not protecting a mask. You listen more deeply because you're not busy positioning yourself. You no longer think in terms of me versus them. It becomes we, not as a concept, but as a felt experience. The same awareness that sees through your eyes is seeing through theirs. This is why the great Zen masters spoke in riddles, because the truth is not grasped with logic. It is felt in silence. It is known in the pause. When the story of me pauses, even for a second, the world feels whole again, not perfect, whole, because it was never missing you. It was waiting for you to stop pretending to be separate. So what happens when you stop comparing? You stop striving to be something else. You start meeting yourself here, not as an achievement, as a presence. You begin to trust your own timing, your own unfolding, and you start seeing others not as competition, but as mirrors, teachers, allies on the path. The end of comparison does not mean you lose drive. It means your drive becomes clean. You are no longer running from shame. You are walking with purpose. You are no longer seeking applause. You are moving from alignment. The hunger fades. The desperation fades. What's left is stillness in motion. And that stillness allows you to be gentle with others, with yourself, because now there is nothing to defend, no self to glorify or shame, just awareness moving through a form for a while. And when this form dissolves, that awareness remains. Not your job, not your reputation, not your achievements, only presence. You don't need to be the best. You don't need to fix yourself before you can rest. You don't need to outshine, outperform, or outlast. There is no scoreboard, no gold star waiting for you at the end. There is only now. There is only awareness. And there is only one question: can you meet yourself without a mask? Because once that mask drops, so does the pressure, so does the fear, so does the need to win. You no longer stand in the race. You stand in the field, watching the wind move the grass, feeling the sunlight on your skin, breathing, alive, enough. And now that the need to compare has vanished, now that there is no solid self left to measure, to win or to lose, what remains is not emptiness, but readiness. A kind of quiet readiness that doesn't seek instruction, doesn't beg for permission, doesn't wait for someone else to tell it what it is. Because the truth is, what you've been seeking was never outside you. The wisdom you thought would arrive from somewhere else has always been flickering within. This is where the next truth shines, the candle that lit itself. Because the match was always in your hand, the wick was always dry. All it needed was your stillness to strike. In Buddhist teachings, the idea that someone else must give you the truth is gently but completely overturned. The Buddha did not say, "I will save you." He said, "Be a lamp unto yourself." He did not offer himself as a savior, but as a reminder, because awakening isn't handed to you. It's uncovered from inside. And that uncovering, that subtle ignition, is something every person carries. There is a common misconception that wisdom must come from outside, that only books, teachers, or perfect conditions can grant it. But the most transformative moments in life rarely arrive that way. They appear in the silence between thoughts, in the stillness of grief, in the breath after surrender. You don't learn them, you remember them, and what you remember, you already are. This is self-arising wisdom, not knowledge picked up and stored, but insight that emerges from direct contact with what is. It doesn't need to be taught, it needs to be recognized, and recognition happens when the noise stops, when the identity quiets, when the grasping pauses, and what's left is clarity without source. The candle that lights itself doesn't need an outside flame. It needs friction. It needs presence. It needs that moment of truth when all your rehearsed answers fall apart, and what's left is your own knowing. Not inherited, not borrowed, yours. That is what the Dhamma points to. Not blind belief, not dependence, but the capacity within each being to see clearly. This is why Zen masters are known for being frustratingly vague. They don't always explain. They don't satisfy curiosity, because true insight can't be spoon-fed. It has to erupt from within. A single word might spark it. A single moment might shift everything. But the shift happens in you, never to you. No one else can do it for you. That's what makes the candle metaphor so powerful, because the flame is not external. It doesn't travel across the room. It ignites from contact, from readiness, from silence deep enough to feel heat in the center of your chest. You don't need to wait for life to bring you a torch. You already carry fire. Self-arising wisdom doesn't come through force. It comes through ripening. The way a fruit falls only when it's ready. The way a flower opens without effort. You don't need to crack yourself open. You need to trust that clarity will come, not as a thunderclap, but as a quiet knowing that no longer trembles. Think of a time you suddenly understood something, not because someone told you, but because something shifted inside. A pain that finally made sense. A habit that suddenly felt false. A truth that didn't arrive, but emerged. That was the candle lighting itself. You didn't invent the wisdom. You discovered it was already glowing beneath the noise. This changes everything, because now you don't need to chase wisdom from gurus or philosophies. You can listen to them, yes, but not as replacements for your own insight, as reminders, as friends holding mirrors. But the flame is yours, always was, always will be. Even the Buddha's own teachings were given with a warning. Don't believe this because I say it. Test it, live it, find out for yourself. That is a teacher who trusts your candle, who knows it will light when the time is right, not through striving, through presence. This means your awakening is not waiting in the future. It's waiting in your attention. It's not at the end of effort. It's beneath effort. Not hidden behind more information, but behind less distraction. The moment you stop outsourcing your truth, you begin to feel it. You begin to recognize that your intuition wasn't a guess. It was a knowing. That your longing wasn't weakness. It was your inner compass pulling you back to center. That your questions weren't signs of confusion. They were doorways into self-lit rooms. When you begin to trust this inner flame, everything shifts. You no longer need to collect endless advice. You no longer need to beg the future for answers. You sit in the mystery and you feel warmth, because the candle is already burning. It doesn't flicker because someone lit it for you. It flickers because you stopped hiding it under noise. This is why solitude is important, not to escape the world, but to hear your own spark, to distinguish your knowing from the opinions swirling around you, to feel what is true without interruption. You don't need to escape forever, just long enough to remember that your wisdom was never conditional. Self-arising wisdom is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It whispers. It rests in the pauses. It shows up after the storm, not with grand declarations, but with quiet shifts. It doesn't say, "I know everything." It says, "This is enough for now." And that's the gift. When you learn to trust your own flame, you stop waiting to be lit by others. You stop giving your power to voices that speak louder than your own. You listen, but you choose. You receive, but you filter, because your knowing is no longer something fragile. It's alive. Even when you feel lost, the flame is there. Even when you doubt, it doesn't go out. You may cover it with fear. You may drown it in noise. But it waits. It doesn't need you to be confident. It needs you to be honest. Honesty is the oxygen of self-arising insight. This is why monks spend decades sitting in silence. Not because they are trying to be holy, but because they are clearing space for what is already holy to emerge. They don't manufacture enlightenment. They create conditions for it to light itself. And you can do the same, without running away, without isolating forever. You simply begin to ask different questions. Not, "What should I believe?" but, "What do I already know deep down?" Not, "What do they say is right?" but, "What feels aligned when everything else is quiet?" And then you act from that place, from the flame, from the wick, from the inner warmth that doesn't need to be loud to be real. You speak from it. You walk from it. You rest in it. And slowly, your life becomes a reflection of what you already knew, but forgot you could trust. The candle that lights itself doesn't ask for praise. It doesn't burn to be seen. It burns because it's what it does. And your truth is the same. You don't need to announce it. You need to live it. And in living it, you light the way, not for others to follow, but for them to see they carry their own match. And now that the candle has been lit, not by someone else's spark, but by the quiet friction of your own presence, the room within begins to take shape. It's not filled with noise or flashes of insight. It's filled with something deeper, something older than your first breath, something softer than your loudest thought. Beneath every doubt, behind every anxious question, below every judgment you've ever whispered to yourself, there has always been a voice, not one that speaks in words, but in knowing. It is not outside of you. It is you beneath all the parts you've mistaken as the whole. This is the voice beneath all voices. Most people mistake the voice in their head for their truth. The fast one, the critical one, the planner, the doubter, the narrator that spins every experience into something to be judged or controlled. But that voice isn't your foundation. It's your surface. It rises and falls like wind over water. The deeper voice, the real one, doesn't rush. It doesn't convince. It doesn't need to win. It only waits for you to listen. This inner voice has been present your entire life. It guided you before you had words. It made you pause before decisions. It told you when something felt wrong, even when logic disagreed. It pulled you back from the edge, not with fear, but with a gentle, steady presence that simply said no, or yes, or more often said nothing at all, but gave you clarity. This voice doesn't need volume to be heard. It needs space. The more noise in your mind, the harder it is to sense. But when the distractions fall away, when the identity quiets, the performance drops, the thinking relaxes, it speaks in a language beyond language. It speaks in stillness, in a felt sense of rightness, not morality, alignment. This voice doesn't argue. It doesn't justify. It doesn't explain itself. It simply knows. And that knowing isn't based on analysis. It's based on awareness. The part of you that sees clearly without needing a reason. It's what Buddhists call prajna, wisdom that arises not from books or theories, but from direct contact with truth. To hear this voice is to begin trusting yourself again. Not the self that's trying to be better or smarter or healed. The self beneath that. The self that was never missing. Most people think trust comes from proof, but the voice beneath all voices teaches that trust comes from presence. You listen long enough, and eventually you realize it's been right more than anything else you've followed. But this voice isn't loud because it doesn't beg for your attention. The ego does. The fear does. But this voice is patient. It doesn't panic. It waits for you to be still enough to feel it. It waits for you to stop thinking you need to earn clarity. Then it shows you that clarity was always underneath the confusion, not in opposition to it, but holding it. That's the paradox. The voice beneath all voices doesn't remove your thoughts. It holds them. It doesn't silence your doubts. It allows them to rise without being shaken. It doesn't fight the ego. It simply watches it pass, like weather. Because it knows what the ego forgets, that you are already enough. This voice won't give you all the answers. It will show you the right questions, the ones you've been afraid to ask, the ones you already know but haven't wanted to hear. It may not tell you what you want to hear, but it will always speak what your soul needs. Sometimes it says, let go. Even when the world says, hold on. Sometimes it says, rest, when everyone else says, push through. Sometimes it says, walk away, when your habits say, stay safe. And when you follow it, not blindly but fully, something unlocks. Not because life gets easier, because your resistance fades. You start making decisions without fear of judgment. You start expressing what you feel without rehearsing it first. You stop explaining yourself to people who are not listening. And you begin to realize that truth doesn't require defense. It just requires space. That's what meditation is for. Not to escape the mind, but to hear what's underneath it, to create the inner silence where the deeper voice can rise like a slow tide. That voice doesn't flood, it lifts you, gently, without force. There's a story in Zen about a student who asked the master, "How do I know if a voice is true?" And the master replied, "Does it make you quieter inside or louder?" The voice beneath all voices always brings stillness, not absence of emotion, but absence of conflict. You might still be afraid, but you're not lost. You might still be uncertain, but you're not at war. To live from that voice is to stop outsourcing your peace. You no longer need someone to tell you what is right. You don't need to be told who you are. You feel it, you know, and you act from that knowing, not with arrogance, but with clarity that no longer seeks permission. This is why the voice beneath all voices doesn't need to shout, because when you hear it, it resonates. It feels familiar, like something you forgot, but always carried. It hums through your chest, not as sound, but as peace. When you ignore it, life feels off. You know something is wrong, even if you can't name it. That's not anxiety, that's misalignment. When you return to it, life begins to flow again. Even if it's still difficult, even if it still hurts, there's a sense of being held by something deeper than your thoughts. This voice is not mystical, it's practical. It tells you when to speak and when to stay silent, when to leave and when to stay, when to breathe through the discomfort and when to walk away. It doesn't need symbols, it needs sincerity. And when you live from this voice, your relationships change. You stop trying to be understood by everyone. You stop begging for acceptance. You know who you are, not because you've perfected yourself, but because you've stopped pretending. The clarity of being becomes louder than the noise of needing to be someone. To follow this voice is to return to center, not just during meditation, but during conflict, during confusion, during love, during loss. You stop looking for signs. You become the sign. You stop seeking light. You become the flame that never left. And in this way, you begin to live in alignment with your own nature. The world still swirls. People still misunderstand you. Fear still knocks. But your roots are no longer shallow. You're not bending to every gust. You're not floating in every tide. You're anchored, not in beliefs, in being. The voice beneath all voices doesn't tell you how to be special. It tells you how to be real, not impressive, whole. And from that wholeness, your presence becomes medicine. Not because it fixes others, but because it reminds them to listen to their own inner knowing. You don't teach this voice. You reflect it in how you walk, in how you sit, in how you pause before reacting, in how you hold your boundaries without apology, in how you look someone in the eye, not to assert power, but to offer stillness. So, if you've been drowning in doubt, the answer is not outside. The answer is silence. Make space, not for new ideas, but for old truths to rise again. You don't need another plan. You need to hear what you already know, but forgot to trust. And now that the voice beneath all voices has been heard, now that stillness has become more than silence, but a signal of your own inner wisdom, what begins to rise next is not something that asks to be seen, but something that quietly acts without needing to be noticed. Because the deepest sign that you know you are enough isn't how loudly you speak it or how often others confirm it. It's how gently you give without expecting anything in return. This is the kindness that doesn't need a witness. And it may be the truest proof that you've returned to your real self. In the world most people live in, kindness often becomes currency. It's praised, shared, and sometimes performed, not always with bad intention, but often with the subtle hope of recognition. To be thanked, to be seen as good, to be confirmed as worthy. But Buddhist thought moves in another direction. It asks, what if the purest kindness is the one no one claps for? And what happens when you do good without needing to be good in the eyes of others? The answer is both freeing and powerful. Because when kindness no longer relies on applause, it becomes limitless. You're no longer serving to strengthen an identity. You're serving because something inside you overflows. And that overflow is not loud. It doesn't need to post itself. It doesn't seek credit. It just gives, because giving is its own joy. This kind of compassion is not dramatic. It's subtle. It's in the way you pause to hold a door without needing a smile in return. The way you speak gently to someone who won't remember your name. The way you pick up something dropped on the sidewalk when no one's watching. These small private acts aren't small at all. They are evidence that your being is no longer trying to be proven. It is simply expressing itself. Buddhism teaches that metta, loving kindness, is not dependent on outcome. It doesn't change based on who receives it. You don't give it only to those who are grateful or those who deserve it by some mental scorecard. You give it because it's your nature. Like a tree offering shade, whether the person beneath it thanks it or not. The shade is not performance, it's function, it's truth. When you begin to live in this way, something inside shifts. You stop keeping score. You stop needing the world to validate your goodness. You stop replaying moments in your mind, wondering if you looked generous enough. And in that stillness, a deeper satisfaction rises, one that doesn't come from being seen as kind, but from knowing that your kindness was real. This doesn't mean you avoid praise or push it away. It means you no longer depend on it. Praise becomes a breeze, not a fuel source. You hear it, you smile, and you move on, not because you are indifferent, but because your center is no longer hungry for approval. It has been fed by something simpler: intention. That's where true freedom lives. Not in being thanked, in knowing you did what felt right even if no one ever knew, in walking away from the act with nothing in your hands but peace. That peace doesn't glow like a trophy. It hums like quiet rain, and that quiet rain softens everything. There's a Zen saying, when the compassion in your heart spills over, let it touch the ground, not the stage, not the crowd, the ground, because the earth receives everything without needing to name it. That's what kindness becomes when it no longer asks for attention. It becomes nourishment. This is why some of the most generous people are invisible. They give without announcing, they support without being credited, and their energy feels like safety, not because it lifts you up in front of others, but because it reminds you that care is still real in a world that often forgets. The moment you realize that kindness is not something you have to prove, you also stop withholding it when it's not acknowledged. Your compassion becomes constant, not because people deserve it, but because you've remembered that your value doesn't rise and fall based on how others respond to your actions. It's easy to be kind when people are watching, harder when no one is. But the kindness that requires a witness is still tethered to identity, and identity is fragile. The moment it isn't validated, it retreats. But the kindness that rises from presence doesn't need a reason. It is reason. It is proof that the voice beneath all voices has settled into your bones. Buddhist monks often speak of dana, generosity, as one of the foundations of spiritual life. But they never said it must be visible. The giving is the path, not the recognition. And the more invisible the act, the more ego dissolves. That's why sweeping the floor in silence, or tending to the sick with no thanks, or offering a meal to someone who never looks you in the eye, these are not lesser forms of service. They are the purest. This doesn't mean you never speak of your actions, but when you do, it's not from ego, it's from sharing the light. When the heart is full, it glows, but it doesn't ask to be photographed. It just burns. Kindness without witness also deepens your own self-respect, because you start to feel the difference between pretending and embodying. You know when your action was real, not because someone else approved, but because you walked away lighter, because the giving left no residue. That's the sign. When nothing sticks to your hand after the gesture came from your truth. And this opens the door to something even more radical: being kind to yourself without an audience. No praise, no cheerleaders, just the quiet decision to rest, to forgive, to nourish. Not because someone told you it was okay, but because your being whispered, "You're allowed to be soft here." That's compassion too, and it may be the most overlooked. You don't need to earn rest, or joy, or gentleness. You don't need to turn your self-care into a project to make it feel valid. You simply choose it, silently, without hashtags, without announcements. Because the self that doesn't need to perform is the self that is free. And in that freedom, your actions begin to align more naturally. You hold the door. You let someone go first. You text someone who's struggling. Not because you're building an image, but because that's what peace does. It ripples. The kindness that doesn't need a witness also heals relationships. You stop weaponizing your generosity. You stop saying, "I did this for you," as a way to secure loyalty. You stop keeping emotional receipts. Your love becomes clean, and in that cleanliness, others relax. They no longer feel the price tag hidden behind the gesture. This doesn't mean you become passive, or invisible, or unrecognized. It means recognition stops mattering. Your compass is no longer applause, it's alignment. You sleep better, not because you were seen, but because you were sincere. And this is the ultimate return, not to being the best, but to being real, to doing good because it's your nature, to giving because it feels like breathing, to helping because suffering hurts, whether or not anyone notices your hand. This kind of kindness cannot be taken from you, because it doesn't belong to your ego. It belongs to your being, and the more you live from it, the more peaceful your presence becomes, not loud, but grounding, not flashy, but undeniable. You stop chasing proof that you're enough. You know it, because only someone who knows they are whole can give without needing to be thanked. And only someone who trusts their own goodness can walk away without needing a mirror to reflect it. So, if no one saw your kindness today, that doesn't mean it didn't matter. It may have mattered more, because kindness without a witness is the sign of a soul that's no longer trying to be valuable. It simply is. And now that kindness has returned to its natural place, quiet, unforced, needing no audience, the heart begins to soften in a different way. Not from the warmth of giving, but from the absence of needing. Not because it is full of more, but because it has stopped grasping. There's a rare and sacred truth that begins to show itself here. It is not fulfillment that proves you are enough. It is the stillness between cravings. The moments when nothing is needed, nothing is chased, and yet peace remains. This is the space between desires. And in that space, something ancient and calm finally says, "This is it." Desire itself is not the problem. In Buddhism, craving is what binds, not the simple wish to feel, to grow, to connect. But even deeper than craving is the emptiness that follows it. The space after one wanting fades, but before another appears. That space is rarely noticed, yet it holds more truth than any achievement ever could. In that space, there is no story, no ambition, no comparison, no goal to grab or fear to avoid. Just breath, just presence. And that's where your sufficiency becomes obvious. Not because you did something, but because you didn't need to. Most people live between cravings without realizing it. The rush from one longing to the next creates the illusion of continuity, but underneath is a rhythm, a pulse, a rise and a fall, a wanting and a release. And what if the release was the real you? What if who you are isn't found in the fire of desire, but in the space it leaves behind? Buddhist thought doesn't tell you to destroy desire. It teaches you to see it, to watch it rise and pass, to not confuse its urgency for identity. And in doing so, it reveals the space that was always there, the awareness that doesn't want or wait, the you that was never incomplete. That's why monks renounce certain pleasures, not because joy is bad, but because they are listening for the silence beneath longing. And in that silence, they find a different kind of joy, one that doesn't surge, one that doesn't crash, one that simply is. This spaciousness isn't empty in a hollow way. It is empty in the way the sky is, capable of holding anything, yet not shaped by what passes through it. When desire disappears, even for a breath, you meet the part of yourself that is not chasing, not proving, just watching. And that watcher is not neutral. It is compassionate. It is alive. It knows when something is worth pursuing, not because it will complete you, but because it resonates with your deepest peace. That's how you begin to act without attachment, to desire without being enslaved. Because what you learn in the space between desires is that peace is not the result of satisfaction. It is the condition of being unhooked. When you are not pulled forward or pushed back, you are free. And that freedom is not flashy. It's not a high. It's a grounded, clear, unshakable yes to life. This space teaches you that you are not your hunger. You are not your dream. You are not even the fulfillment of it. You are what watches the cycle and knows it for what it is: impermanent, beautiful, harmless, when not mistaken for identity. In daily life, this spaciousness shows up in the pause before reaction, in the breath before consumption, in the second you step outside to feel the air instead of scrolling for distraction. These aren't minor acts, they are doorways. Desperation cannot survive in this space, not because your circumstances are perfect, but because your relationship to them has changed. You no longer reach to be real. You rest, you breathe, you listen. You say, "Let's see what arises next," without anxiety. And when desire returns, as it will, you greet it not with guilt or fear, but with curiosity. What does this want from me? What is it promising? Do I need it, or am I afraid of not having it? And sometimes you let it pass, not because you're denying yourself, but because you've remembered that your being is not built on desire. It is revealed in its absence. That's why this teaching is not about renouncing the world. It's about re-seeing your place in it. You are not a creature of endless appetite. You are not broken until the next thing is reached. You are the space that can hold every longing without drowning in it. This truth doesn't mean you stop pursuing joy. It means you pursue from sufficiency, from already being enough. You don't eat to feel whole. You eat because the moment deserves celebration. You don't love to feel valuable. You love because your nature is connection. This changes your energy. People feel the difference. You're no longer taking from life. You're meeting it. You're no longer climbing over yourself to reach the next peak. You're walking the path, knowing that each step is whole. That doesn't mean life is always gentle, but it means you are. Desire will still whisper. That's fine. It's not an enemy. It's a visitor. It only becomes dangerous when it lives in your house, but when it knocks and leaves, you remain. And what remains is peace, not as a trophy, but as your default. Think about it. You've had moments watching a sunset, holding someone's hand, breathing after a long day, where there was no future, no next thing, no narrative, just being. Those weren't empty. They were full, because they were undivided. That fullness doesn't need decoration. It doesn't need to be posted or explained. It just exists. And it proves, beyond argument, that you don't need to achieve anything to be whole. You don't need to grab more to matter. You may forget this. That's okay. The spaciousness doesn't disappear. It just waits. Every breath is a chance to return. Every moment is a doorway. And the more you step through, the more your nervous system resets. The more your body trusts, the more your mind settles. Eventually, even desire becomes transparent. Not wrong, just visible. You don't resist it, you don't obey it, you witness it, and sometimes you follow, sometimes you don't. Either way, your value is unchanged. This is why the Buddha smiled so often, not because he had everything, but because he had nothing he needed to cling to. His joy came not from what he held, but from what he no longer had to chase. And in that stillness, love became purer, thought became clearer, life became enough. So the next time you feel like you're falling behind because you're not achieving fast enough, pause. The next time you think happiness is one more success away, pause. The next time you notice everyone else reaching for more, pause. And in that pause, feel the space between desires. That space is not empty. That space is your truth. And now that the space between desires has been seen, now that your being has learned to rest in the quiet where nothing is missing, what arises next is not effort, not achievement, but something even more subtle. Something that doesn't need to be felt to be true, doesn't need to be noticed to be meaningful. It's not about striving to be good or beautiful or useful. It's about the kind of presence that is all of those things, without trying. This is the lesson of the tree that didn't know it was beautiful. A truth so quiet, most people miss it. But if truly seen, it can set down the final weight you never realized you were carrying. A tree doesn't look at its leaves and say, "These are good enough." It doesn't gaze at its bark and ask, "Am I still growing?" It doesn't count its blossoms, wondering if they are as colorful as last year's. It simply grows, not because someone told it to, not because it's trying to impress, but because it is its nature. Roots deepen, branches extend, leaves open, seasons change, and none of it is performative. Yet people rest in its shade. Birds trust its branches. Soil is fed by its fallen leaves. The world benefits from something that never once questioned its worth. It never needed to know it was beautiful to give. It never needed to be told it was valuable to continue. In Buddhism, this is close to the concept of suchness, the idea that things exist not with meaning assigned by the mind, but with value simply because they are. The tree is not sacred because it fits a category. It is sacred because it lives as it was meant to. That's the lesson we forget when we live in constant self-measurement. People are conditioned to track progress, to ask, "How am I doing? How do I compare? What do they see when they look at me?" But a tree never asks these things. It doesn't grow more quickly when praised. It doesn't wither from being unseen. It responds only to light, water, and time. And yet, it provides so much simply by existing. What if that is also you? There are people who move through the world without knowing how much they're healing others. They don't speak loudly. They don't make grand declarations. But something about their presence brings peace. They give calm without noticing. They offer refuge without trying. Because they are not performing their goodness. They are simply rooted in it. And the deeper their roots, the more they give. Not because they are trying to be generous, but because that's what happens when you stop striving and start being, just like a tree. The mind, however, doesn't like this. It wants confirmation. It wants evidence. It wants applause. It wants to know it's beautiful. But beauty that needs permission is still caught in hunger. Real beauty doesn't ask to be confirmed. It radiates without effort, and often without awareness. This is why the wisest people often appear ordinary. They are not trying to shine. They are just not hiding. They have nothing to prove. So their energy becomes gentle, wide, grounding, like the shade of a great tree, cool, unnoticed, but unmistakably needed. To live this way is not to reject recognition. It's to stop chasing it. If it comes, fine. If not, still fine. Your roots do not grow deeper from compliments. They grow from silence, from stillness, from consistency, from staying through the seasons, even when no one is watching. This is how self-worth transforms, not by building a stronger identity, but by dissolving the idea that you need to be aware of your value in order to have it. You don't. The tree never will, and it is no less complete. Your actions may never be praised. Your words may not go viral. Your efforts may be overlooked. But if they came from sincerity, they shaped the world in ways you may never see. That's not emptiness. That's freedom. Because the deepest gifts are often invisible. You don't see the root systems that keep forests alive. You don't see the silent photosynthesis feeding the air, but they're happening, and without them, nothing thrives. When you begin to trust that your worth doesn't need to be witnessed to be real, you stop anxiously tracking your growth. You let go of needing to be told you're improving. You stop asking the mirror to give you permission to rest. Instead, you begin living more like the tree. You grow where you are. You respond to the light. You stay through winters. You give without knowing who receives. And slowly, that becomes enough. This kind of enoughness is rare. Because it doesn't scream, it doesn't insist, it doesn't make a brand out of itself, but it is unmistakable. People feel it when they're near you. They feel your calm, your groundedness, your absence of self-performance. And even if they can't explain it, they trust it. You don't have to convince anyone of your worth when your presence is sincere. That sincerity is the quiet proof, not through words, through energy, through steadiness, through the way you keep showing up, not to be admired, but to offer shade, fruit, air. The ego may still whisper. It may say, "What's the point if no one sees?" But that's not your true voice. That's the hunger you inherited from a culture obsessed with attention. The real voice is quieter. It says, stay rooted, keep growing, give what you are. And when you live that way long enough, you begin to relax. You begin to trust the unfolding. You begin to smile without reason. Not because life got easier, but because you stopped needing it to admire you back. You stop wondering if your beauty is visible. You start knowing that your presence is the beauty. Not flashy, not temporary, just enduring. And even when storms come, you don't panic. You sway, you bend, you lose a few leaves, but your trunk holds. Because it was never grown for applause. It was grown for truth. This way of being isn't taught much. It's too quiet for that, but it is remembered in the presence of those who live it. You felt it before, in someone who didn't rush to speak, didn't need to prove, didn't grasp for your approval. You may not remember what they said, but you remember how you felt near them. That's the root. That's what remains. So, if you ever doubt your value again, pause. Don't reach. Don't plead. Just stay. Just breathe. Let your roots speak. Let your stillness become your message. The tree doesn't bloom more beautifully because it knows it's being watched. It blooms because it's time. And its time comes whether anyone's looking or not. And now that the lesson of the tree has taken root, now that being without striving, giving without knowing, and blooming without the need for validation have become part of your understanding, the ground beneath all of it begins to show its deeper nature. Not as something solid to cling to, but as something vast to trust. What lies beneath the branches, beneath the stillness, beneath even the self that witnessed it all, is not a void to be feared. but a presence that needs no name. This is the emptiness that felt full, not a loss, but a liberation. Not absence, but everything, held without ownership. In Mahayana Buddhism, the word shunyata is often translated as emptiness. But it's not the cold emptiness of despair. It is not a rejection of life. It is not nothingness. It is the emptiness of false identity, the emptiness of ego, the emptiness of needing to be a fixed thing in a changing world. And when that kind of emptiness is truly seen, what rises is not hollowness, but peace. Most people fear the idea of being empty because they confuse it with being erased. But shunyata doesn't erase. It reveals. It strips away what was never really there. The clinging, the identity, the desperate attempt to define yourself in a world that refuses to hold still. Emptiness says, you don't need to be anyone, because you already are part of everything. This is not philosophy. It's freedom. When the idea of me starts to dissolve, suffering follows, not because pain vanishes, but because the one who thought they were trapped in it begins to disappear. And in its place, something quiet and luminous appears, a presence that no longer needs protection, a heart that no longer needs to perform. This is fullness without ego, the kind of richness that doesn't belong to anyone, the kind of aliveness that doesn't scream for attention. Like a clear sky, it holds everything but clings to nothing. You are not less when you are empty of self. You are more. Because in that emptiness, there is finally space for the world to flow through you. A thought arises, and it's seen. A feeling surfaces, and it passes. A memory returns, and it is held, not as identity, but as weather. When the self is empty, everything can be welcomed, because nothing sticks, nothing threatens, nothing defines. You are not the wave, you are the ocean it passes through. And in this way, shunyata is the opposite of loss. It is the end of clinging, the end of becoming, the end of exhaustion. And from that ending comes rest, not sleep, not retreat, but the kind of rest that lives at the center of all motion, the calm that does not need to be achieved because it was never disturbed. To live from this place doesn't mean you walk around in a trance. It means you are no longer hijacked by your identity. You can play a role without believing it defines you. You can feel anger without becoming it. You can experience joy without needing to hold it forever. This is the gift of emptiness, presence without attachment. That presence is not passive, it is deeply responsive. It doesn't deny life, it meets it fully. Because it's not afraid of disappearing, it already knows there was never a permanent I to lose. What you are is not a thing. It is awareness itself. And awareness is not solid. It moves, it listens, it holds, it empties. This is why the Bodhisattva path in Mahayana Buddhism is so powerful. Bodhisattvas vow to return to help others even after their own liberation, not because they are clinging to identity, but because they've emptied themselves of it. And in that emptiness, compassion becomes boundless. There is no me who is helping. There is only help. There is no you who needs saving. There is only connection. This emptiness does not erase love. It purifies it. It makes love lighter, stronger, less demanding, because now love is not a transaction. It's a flow. You are not loving someone to be loved in return. You are loving because it is your nature, because nothing obstructs the giving. When self is emptied, what remains is capacity. You find you can sit with pain without rushing to solve it. You can be misunderstood without needing to defend. You can face uncertainty without needing a story to hold it together. This is not apathy. It's the deepest form of peace, born not from knowing who you are, but from not needing to. Even the Buddha said, "Events happen, deeds are done, but there is no individual doer thereof." This is not a denial of experience. It's a reminder that the self is not the source. The self is a lens. And when the lens is set down, what's seen becomes clearer. This clarity isn't loud. It doesn't need to explain itself. It breathes, it walks, it smiles. It moves through the world like wind through leaves, not because it is empty in the negative sense, but because it is free of the need to hold shape. In this way, emptiness becomes the deepest affirmation. Not, "I am something," but "I am not what I thought, and that's enough." Not, "I must build a perfect self," but "I am part of everything already. Let me rest there." And the resting isn't withdrawal. It's return. Return to the breath. Return to the body. Return to the moment where the boundaries between self and other begin to fade, where the skin becomes a doorway instead of a wall. From here, you don't need to seek purpose. You are part of purpose. You don't need to define your value. You are the expression of value in motion. You don't need to explain your being. Being is explanation enough. And this is why emptiness feels full, because when there's no self in the way, everything is allowed. Grief is not rejected. Joy is not clutched. Beauty is not owned. Pain is not personalized. Everything can flow because nothing is blocked by identity. You become like a bowl, empty but ready, like a sky, open but still, like a river, moving but not needing direction. And in that movement, life becomes lighter, not because it changes, but because you've stopped clinging to what never belonged to you. You may still have a name, a story, a face, but these are garments, not your bones. They can be worn with care, but they do not hold your truth. The truth is what remains when the garments fall away. The truth is what breathes when the mind is quiet. The truth is the silence between thoughts, the witness that never leaves. And once you begin living from that space, life becomes less dramatic, less personal, more intimate. You are no longer trying to win. You are simply walking. You are no longer trying to matter. You already do. Even the moments that once felt hollow, waiting in line, sitting in traffic, being alone, begin to shine. Not because they're filled, but because they are no longer avoided. Emptiness has become home. So let this teaching land not in your head, but in your breath. Don't try to grasp it. Feel it. Let it touch the part of you that is already tired of being someone. Let it remind you that underneath all the doing, all the becoming, all the proving, there is nothing you need to be. You are the space. You are the stillness. You are the openness that holds the world without owning it. And in that, you are more than enough. And now that emptiness has been seen not as absence, but as fullness. Now that the self has been dissolved into space wide enough to hold everything without grasping, what remains is not perfection, but permission. Permission to be unfinished, permission to carry cracks, permission to see even the places you once wanted to hide as part of the path itself. Because true peace doesn't grow where shame is buried. It blooms where flaws are met with reverence. This is the story of the monk who thanked his flaws, not because they made life easy, but because they revealed the truth. In Buddhism, awakening doesn't arrive in spite of our imperfections. It comes through them. There was a monk once, not a famous teacher, not a silent sage in a distant temple, but a restless seeker, full of questions and contradiction. He arrived at the monastery not with grace, but with guilt. His hands trembled with regret. His eyes avoided the other monks. Every step he took into the stillness of that place reminded him of how broken he felt. While others bowed with ease, he flinched. While others chanted, he questioned, and every silence made his self-doubt louder. But he stayed, not because he felt worthy, but because something deeper inside him was tired of running. So he rose with the bell each morning, sat with the pain in his knees, cleaned the temple floor with hands that had once harmed, and he waited, at first for forgiveness, then for silence, and finally for something he couldn't name. At night, he would sit beneath a Bodhi tree in the temple courtyard and talk to the moon, not out loud, not in prayer, but in surrender. "I have made mistakes," he would say in his breath. "I am full of failure." And still, the moon never turned away. That quiet gaze stayed. One day, while sweeping the leaves from the stone path before morning chanting, the abbot approached. He watched the monk in silence for a moment, then said gently, "You sweep as though you are punishing the ground." The monk stopped. He looked down at the broom in his hands and whispered, "I have done many things I cannot take back." The abbot nodded slowly and said, "Then make this the place where they stop echoing." He placed his hand on the monk's shoulder. Not by forgetting, but by seeing clearly. A flaw only causes suffering when it is hidden, but when it's held with compassion, it becomes wisdom. This was the beginning, not of perfection, not of pride, but of presence. The monk didn't erase his past. He stopped arguing with it. He stopped using it as proof that he didn't belong. Instead, he let it become his practice. When anger arose, he didn't resist it. He sat with it like an old companion. When shame whispered, he bowed to it and asked what it was trying to protect. Little by little, something inside him changed. Not by effort, by seeing. He began to thank his flaws, not because they were pleasant, but because they had softened his arrogance, because they had broken the mask of superiority, because they had brought him to his knees and taught him how to listen. In Buddhist teachings, mistakes are not sins to be erased. They are footsteps on the path. A wrong word becomes an opportunity for humility. A selfish act becomes a teacher in empathy. A moment of harm becomes a doorway to vow not to repeat it. The Dharma doesn't demand that you be stainless. It invites you to be sincere. This is why the monk bowed deeper than others, not because he was more devout, but because he knew what it cost him to arrive in that bow. He had wrestled with his past, not to erase it, but to include it. He carried the weight of his younger self not with shame, but with a quiet hand on the back. "You were confused," he would say to his own reflection, "but now we walk differently." The Buddha taught that even Mara, the tempter, must be welcomed. That transformation does not come from defeating the shadow, but from understanding it. That compassion must begin in the places we feel least deserving of it. And the monk learned this not in scripture, but in silence, in watching his own mind, in forgiving it, again and again. One day, a younger monk came to him with tears in his eyes. "I've failed," the boy said. "I lied. I broke my promise. I've ruined my practice." The monk listened without judgment, and then said, "Then your practice has finally begun." That was the gift of his flaws. They made him a vessel for truth. Not the truth of achievement, but the truth of being human and being held anyway. Flaws, in this view, are not curses. They are cracked doors. Each mistake that is met with awareness becomes a step toward compassion. Each wound that is touched with kindness becomes a wellspring of understanding, not despite the flaw, but through it. This is not easy. The mind wants to hide, the ego wants to forget. But the path asks us to include, to bring the forgotten parts home, to say to the younger, foolish, angry versions of ourselves, "You are part of this story too." And in doing so, you reclaim your wholeness, not as perfection, but as integration. You stop asking, "Am I good enough?" and begin asking, "Can I stay present with what is?" Because the answer to worth is not found in the past. It is found in the breath that meets the past without turning away. That's why the monk gave thanks. Not to glorify his flaws, but to free himself from the belief that they defined him. He no longer needed to be spotless to walk the path. He needed only to walk it fully. With eyes open, with heart willing, with hands that didn't pretend to be clean, but knew how to carry water. And that's the lesson. You are not enough in spite of your flaws. You are enough because you can hold them with gentleness, because they didn't stop you from growing, because they brought you here to this very moment where you no longer need to hide. So let the broken parts breathe. Let them speak. Let them weep. But don't let them rule. Let them teach. Let them soften you. Let them shape you into someone who can listen deeply, because you know what it means to be unheard. Who can forgive fully, because you know what it means to need forgiveness. This isn't weakness. This is the strength that doesn't shout. This is the strength of someone who knows their darkness and walks anyway, who knows their pain and still reaches out to soothe another's. The monk who thanked his flaws did not transcend them. He carried them like prayer beads, each one a reminder that grace is not earned. It is remembered. After all the lessons, all the stillness, all the truths whispered in silence, one message remains clearer than anything else. You were never missing. You don't need to become someone. You don't need to fix what was never broken. You don't need more praise, more achievement, more perfection to finally deserve rest. You were always enough, not later, not when, but now. Every lesson, from the silence that doesn't need praise to the monk who thanked his flaws, has pointed to one thing. Your worth is not measured, it's remembered. Beneath the mirror, behind the roles, beyond the craving and comparison, there is something constant, something still, something unshaken. That something is you, the real you, not the voice that doubts, but the space that hears it, not the identity that performs, but the presence that simply is. So, as you fall asleep tonight, let the striving fall away. Let the judgments rest. Let the weight of not enough melt into the silence. You've walked with bamboo and fire, with emptiness and fullness, with trees and breath and voices beneath voices. And if all of that pointed to one thing, it's that nothing more is needed. You are already home. If this journey spoke to you, if even one truth stayed in your heart, let me know in the comments by writing, "I am already enough." I read every single one. And if you'd like to keep exploring this path of awakening, kindness, and self-trust, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss another step on the journey. You are enough. You always were. Sleep peacefully.